You are live.
Okay, thanks very much, Carl. And I will call the General Committee meeting tonight to order. Welcome to the new year, the 2022 sitting of Barrie City Council. Tonight's General Committee meeting obviously is being held virtually with members of General Committee, the Executive Management Team, and the City Clerk participating by video conference. The senior leadership team who have reports on tonight's agenda are not visible, but are of course able to answer questions on those staff reports tonight. We will run through the consent agenda, of course. That is where I read out the title associated with the staff reports and the recommended motions. If you wish the item held for discussion tonight, please indicate. If not, the item will be considered to be approved and will go forward to City Council on January the 17th for approval. We do have a presentation tonight. We'll do that immediately after the consent agenda. So we run through the consent agenda items, the staff reports and items for discussion placed by members of council tonight. The first staff report is with regards to the Holly Community Center naming rights, held by Councillor Jim Harris. Thank you. Next, we have the ICE allocation policy 5-year review. Anybody wish to hold that item? No. Seeing none. We have several items for discussion on tonight's agenda. The first was placed by Councillor Kungle. It's an invitation to the County of Simcoe to present to the Finance and Corporate Services Committee. No holds on that. That is approved. The next item is a review of options for delivery of long-term care facilities. That's been put on by Deputy Mayor Ward. No holds on that. That is approved as well. The next item is the subject of the presentation. If somebody would care to hold that. Councillor Riepma, held. It's placed by Councillor Kungle. That's the task force recommendations. Finally, we have an item placed by Councillor Harvey, which is to reinstate the program for residents supporting local restaurants in exchange for their parking tickets. Comments, or sorry, does anyone wish to hold that item? No, seeing none. That's approved. Thanks, Councillor Harvey. Okay, so the items that were held are the Holly Community Center naming rights and the, of course, the task force recommendations. We will first, though, do the presentation of the task force. Madam Clerk, are you going to share your screen on that, or am I? How are we doing that?
You can share your screen for that if you'd like, or we can have Carl share his screen, whichever you prefer.
Actually, maybe Mr. Kovacs can do that, as we have three of us that are going to be tag teaming the presentation. Okay, so with us tonight, members of General Committee are Ray Duhamel, who will be no stranger to you, as I imagine, and Andy Thompson, who may not be a stranger to you either, an architect in Barrie who has done extensive work in the housing field. Both were members of the Housing Affordability Task Force, and we're going to tag team the presentation for you tonight. Just by a brief way of introduction, I did want to sort of remind everybody that as we set out with these task forces, the one headed by Councillor Harris, Deputy Mayor Ward, and this one tonight, which I chaired, our goal was not to do a study, not to give you recommendations that were going to sit on a shelf, but rather to give you an action plan. And so what I hope to outline, and Ray and Andy together with myself over the next 10 or 15 minutes, are actions that we feel, while bold, are achievable and immediate steps in many cases that we could take to try and address the housing crisis in Barrie. So we're going to run through the slides. I thought what we could do after that is take questions on the content of the presentation, which really mirrors the task force report. We tried to summarize the report's recommendations in this presentation. And so we can have a question and answer sort of discussion there. And then later on tonight, when we address the item for discussion, we can talk about the adoption of the recommendations, which ones we want to discuss and adopt. So we started with this slide. And we wanted to sort of get this message out initially. And if, you know, in the first page of the task force report, we just tried to set the context to say housing affordability is an issue that literally affects every one of our residents, but most severely impacts those on modest income. Because as housing gets more expensive all the way up the chain, those with the least amount of money to manage the cost of living in a city that becomes more expensive are those who are squeezed out. But there's a key distinction. Affordable housing, the challenge with that term is it means so many different things. Traditionally, it's meant lower income housing needs that are subsidized by the government. But in recent years, it's sort of become conflated to mean anything that somebody considers affordable, and the definitions are something that this council has struggled with at times. And so we called ourselves the Housing Affordability Task Force because a lot of what we wanted to refer to was the lack of affordability across lower and middle and even higher income households, be they rented around, because this issue truly does affect everybody. It affects the next generation's ability to own a home in our city, to achieve their housing dreams. It affects certainly those on modest income, trying to find something that they can rent and raise their family in. And obviously it has a disproportionate impact on lower income residents who can't find anything at all. So next slide. That led to our problem statement, and our problem statement was pretty straightforward. What direct actions can the city take to rapidly expand the supply of rental and market affordable housing built by the private sector and the supply of supportive and affordable housing built by the public sector? And there is the list of the members of the task force. Of course, this is in the report, and I would just note again, we were conscious that we wanted housing advocates, service providers, staff, and people working in the industry, as well as representatives of the industry, to be part of the task force. Next slide, please. So this is the fundamental economic challenge. The math doesn't work. Ontario Works monthly amount for single individuals, $733. Those working in our community at a minimum wage job, if they were getting 25 hours a week, $1,500 a month, 40 hours a week, or 35 hours a week, about a little over 2,000. But in November 21, the average rent for one bedroom apartment in Barrie listed online, $1,700 to $1,740. We were briefly third in the country, above Toronto, if you can believe it. This is a report from last summer, and there's been other data since that where we've moved around. But Barrie has been in the top 5 most expensive cities in the country for rent for the past 5 years. Next slide, please. And this is really what we tried to say in the report, that the housing crisis is really several separate problems. They affect each other, but you've got to take different approaches and different solutions. So these are some of the direct approaches that we are suggesting in the report, to get straight to it. Homelessness needs investment in supportive housing, rental markets becoming affordable, need new policies and programs to get more affordable supply built. And the high cost of home ownership, of course, also requires a supply and demand solutions, but a lot of those are going to have to come from our partners in the federal and provincial governments. Next slide. So what we decided to focus on was what we thought we could make the biggest impact. Land availability, number 1. Number 2, funding for supportive and subsidized housing. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to move right into the recommendations here. I'm just going to do this slide and then hand it off to Ray Duhamel. So, but just to position these to you, members of General Committee, we chose land availability because we're aware that this is key to the supply challenge. Whether you're talking about a housing provider that's trying to build a supportive or subsidized housing project, or whether we are talking about a company or an individual developer trying to build purpose-built rental housing. And the, if you speak with the industry, land costs, which are of course driven by availability, are one of the key barriers and key issues driving up the price of housing in Barrie. The second piece of funding for supportive and social housing, of course, probably is more self-explanatory, and we'll get to the reasons for that later on. So I'm just going to touch on this one, then hand it off to Ray. And I should have noted off the offset, or at the outset, that I know there are a lot of people in our community who have been extremely concerned about emergency housing and specifically the shelter and warming system, especially over the weekend. I know Councillor Harris has an amendment to tonight's motion that she'll bring forward, later tonight. We do want to talk about that later tonight. But because the core of the task force's work, which has been developed over the last 7 months, are about the sort of longer term solutions, we'd like to present those to you. And then the discussion about the shelter and warming system tonight, we might have later in the discussion tonight. Okay, so on the issue of land availability, here are the recommendations that our task force has brought forward. And these you have seen before because we brought them forward as a quick start. Allow housing as of right on institutionally zoned lands in Barrie. Council adopted this in June, and thank you, members of council, for that. The bylaw was enacted in October, and as you will see tomorrow, the new foundations program has been created to communicate that opportunity to institutional and places of worship that do have excess property or the potential for housing. Council has chosen to fund feasibility studies to help initiate those projects. So that was a quick start initiative that you approved. And you will see why we started with this one, because it ties into the next set of recommendations. So I'll hand it over to Mr. Duhamel and ask for the next slide.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of General Committee. Pleased to be here this evening. Moving on with the next set of recommendations associated with land is talking about the commercially zoned sites in the city. And the next slide right after this, we'll have a map for you to visualize this, but it's quite a great resource that the task force felt was untapped, and will generally over the course of the next perhaps 10 to 20 years, maybe even 30 years, we'll see a substantive movement towards redevelopment and new housing built to increase the supply. So of course, the first recommendation that you can see in blue on the screen is to allow housing as of right on large, well-located commercially zoned properties, and develop policies and zoning to associate with those. We already do that to many respects now, as you know, in your general commercial zones and along your mixed-use corridors. But this is to take that one step further and really dive in and see what opportunities exist. And then that flows into the green recommendation, which you can see is to actually step out of our comfort zone as an organization. And I'm saying colloquially because I'm part of the development industry, but proactively talking to property owners about master planning those untapped resource commercial sites. And there are many, and those sites are perfect for increasing the supply, not only of units generally speaking, but obviously of affordable housing specifically. Those sites they've already been developed, but they've got stormwater management schemes have already captured large, pervious surfaces. There's transit next door. There's sewers in the ground that can accommodate this form of development. There's a transit route going along the front of the house of the properties. In many cases, a transit stop right in front of them. So these are ideally suited. There's all kinds of services and facilities around that support the redevelopment of those sites. And we thought as a committee or as a task force, that Bayfield Strip north of Highway 400 might be an ideal example of zeroing in on opportunities that are kind of low-hanging fruit in this sense and master planning it. And if we could go to the next slide, please. I think that the task force really loved these graphics. The slide on the left of the screen gives you a sense of the magnitude of the actual commercial areas in the city. And I'm remiss, I forgot it during the task force process to actually ask staff what the quantum of the area was. But there's an enormous volume of commercial sites in the city of Barrie. And if you think through and you go through your mind on all the sites in red there's so many sites that have dominant oceans of parking in front of buildings. They have single-story pad buildings. They're ripe opportunities for redevelopment, increasing housing supply, and providing affordable housing. It just makes so much sense on so many levels. And then obviously, if we just zeroed on just one of many is the Bayfield Mall site, which is on the right side of your screen. Just look at the amount of asphalt that exists in the few pad-mounted buildings that are located adjacent to Bayfield. What a terrific opportunity to put more housing along that strip where people can walk out and shop, and they can jump on the bus, or they can walk downtown. Just one of so many sites that are available that would be terrific to work with the landowners to see if there's an opportunity to facilitate development on these sites. Next slide, please. So then we went into a slightly different direction, but staying on the land theme, which you'll find in the report. This is talking about parking. And really the committee had quite a few spirited discussions about parking and how parking fundamentally it impacts on the supply of housing generally speaking, and it impacts on the availability of affordable housing specifically. And the reason it does that is that if we have affordable housing projects, and I can think of a bunch, and I'm certainly each one of you around the table can think of applications that have come before you. Generally speaking, there's certain types of development that need less parking, either because the clientele, the residents that live in those projects have lower proportional car ownership on average, or they're located on great bus routes, or they're located in the downtown where you can walk to everything you need. So let's be proactive and look at two key elements, and that's what the recommendations on this slide show. The first is, can we share parking? Let's really dive in and figure out opportunities to share. We're pushing, rightfully so, throughout the municipality to push for mixed-use sites across the city of Barrie. Let's see if we can share commercial and residential parking. That doesn't mean you share every site, every parking stall all the time, but there are some stalls which you can imagine are not needed in the daytime when the commercial users need it. And there's some stalls that are not going to be needed commercially at night that the residents can use. And so you're still going to need some dedicated stalls depending on what the uses is and where, but it's not, the entire parking lot doesn't need to be segregated into commercial and residential parking. And then building on that, and our more ambitious request is to really eliminate parking requirements for certain classes of development. And when I say eliminate, I don't want you to get the task force doesn't want everyone to get concerned by the word eliminate. It's really focusing, I think the task force felt more out of a market-focused approach towards providing parking. So it's eliminating the specific requirements and letting the needs of the actual residents and the developer that's moving forward to examine, and through even with city staff developing policies and parameters for it. But if it's on arterial roads like this one, this example here is in front of you, it's great transit access. Otherwise, there isn't a need to provide parking at the levels that we have been historically providing parking in the city of Barrie. Next slide, please. Then this moves one step forward. We in the report, it's under the land section, but because this recommendation will ultimately help on the land supply side, and it doesn't mean that there's the city's not acquiring land, but the city has the ability, we believe, as a task force, to facilitate and focus on affordable housing. And if General Committee, ultimately Council, were to agree to dedicate a staff member in Development Services Department to oversee and really push through the delivery of affordable housing, that could make a substantive improvement. It's not going to make a difference tomorrow. It's going to make a difference meaningfully in 5 years' time and 10 years' time, when the amount and volume of affordable housing projects can be fast-tracked. They can be, there's an opportunity to, if it's been held up in the approvals process because of waiting on comments, or there's some federal funding that needs to be looked at, or the community improvement plan policies and how to apply for it, and how to really focus on the strategy of developing affordable housing. There's all kinds of ways in which a dedicated resource person can simply say, this is critical to move forward. And if that person can help affordable housing become shovel ready faster, then the task force felt strongly that would be a great outcome at the end of the day. Next slide, please. So this is, I think, my last slide, and then I'll turn it over to Andy Thompson, who has some pretty great slides to go through. This is fairly straightforward in terms of the first recommendation. It talks about developing a regular housing stock monitoring. Let's make sure we evaluate and learn exactly what we've got. How many affordable units at what size thresholds do we have? What other types of units do we have in the approval timeline that have been registered, that have been occupied? Let's get more data on what we actually have and monitor it. And then the next thing is a very specific recommendation that came out of the task force, is talking about establishing a review team with the goal to support a pilot project on affordable rental or supportive social housing. So what this review team intends to do is to effectively sit down, and that the report talks about who would comprise that potential review team, but the team would sit down at the beginning and identify all the discretional approval requirements that are required for any given project. And then go, and from that, whatever number of items are on that list, 100 items on that list, can half of them be removed for a pilot project? And there's no specifics. The task force didn't get into the weeds on the actual number of requirements or anything like that. That's really a staff function and a review team function to get through. But once we know what could be potentially eliminated from the approval and review process, then evaluate a specific affordable rental or supportive and social housing project using those revised parameters, and then evaluate it after it's been built. So the purpose of it is to look at how did we do at the end of the day with a streamlined and less intensive approval process? Did it come to market faster? Did it result in a good planning outcome, a great streetscape, something that the city of Barrie can be proud of? If it can, then maybe that opens up the door to keep the conversation going on other affordable and supportive and social housing projects moving forward. So thank you, Your Worship, and members of the General Committee. I'll turn it over now to Andy Thompson.
Thanks, everyone. So this has been really interesting to watch the arc of tiny homes from the early 1990s to where we are now. It used to be a kind of a ragtag group of rebel architects that proposed laneway housing in Toronto and off-grid trailers and all kinds of stuff that was counterculture back then. But now the Ministry of Housing is authoring guidelines on how to do tiny homes properly and what best practices for detached accessory dwelling units are as a solution to affordable housing. I've always said that affordable housing really needs to start with affordable buildings. And one of the easiest ways to make things more affordable, which was well understood in Japan, is make it smaller. Literally make the building smaller. You use less material, less energy, less carbon footprint, and these can fit in all kinds of infill sites. So two of the ideas here, the recommendations, are to develop guidelines for how these sit on the ground, so that instead of looking at a shanty or a trailer park type setup, you've got something that's actually like a garden court or cottage courtyards, and really tastefully done landscaping, where you can take a single residential lot in Barrie or a combined 2-lot presence with a common court and 20 units around it. That's entirely possible with the provincial policy we have now, and certainly you can do some pretty amazing off-grid and very low carbon, very low energy buildings in that format that have very, very low operating costs for the 30-year term as well. We've calculated the operating cost for one of these is anywhere from $500 a year. That's total utility spend to $1,000 in a up to a 400 square foot unit. So the second recommendation is for the CBO Barrie to convene a working group to discuss these innovative forms of housing that could be constructed in Barrie. Next slide. So the context, this is an idea of a cottage court where you've got a double wide lot, a number of units all the way around it, a shared community garden in the center, without the requirement of parking. So this ties back to the market-driven parking requirements. If you are given the option to purchase something and it doesn't have a parking space, then that's on you. And then the city steps up with its transit services and multimodal transportation to support more communities, so you get more walkable communities. There's also a mid-rise solution to this kind of approach, but these three recommendations are a call for land to be made available philanthropically or for the construction of small-scale supportive housing or tiny home projects. Often these are like a land lease. So I buy the unit, I own the unit outright, but I'm leasing the land, which reduces substantially the cost of the development for the renter or the owner. The second recommendation is to map all sites that could be utilized this way in the city of Barrie, and then also to work with the Barrie Legion to build homes for heroes. You've probably seen the Property Brothers doing ads for exactly this across Canada. All the legions are considering how to do this to make housing for veterans. So I'm happy to hear that that's actually happening in Barrie as well. Next slide, please. The image in the background there shows Regent Park, which was really a mixed zoning development in the older Regent Park social housing development. And the idea was to really mix up the markets and bring in a wide range of housing types, where in this building in particular, there was seniors housing, market rate condominiums, townhouses, there was commercial at grade, and then there was a bunch of affordable housing, supportive housing units in the same development. The idea was not to create a slum, mix markets, and create a really excellent building, highly energy efficient. This one in particular has a combined heat and power system in the basement. So that competition came out of seeing that this mono kind of market for social housing didn't really work at scale. And the community benefits charges and housing in lieu are ideas that would either give a developer the offset right to put cash into affordable housing fund. And I see the line has been added, that could be contributed to a dedicated reserve fund, similar to parkland, which could then be used to fund affordable housing projects. So if instead of the 10% or 20% affordable units in a building, then those funds could go into that dedicated reserve fund. Thank you. I think that's all. Oh, there's one more. Next slide. Also, this is something that's in play and Barrie already is the conversion of motel hotels to provide supportive housing and developing evaluation criteria to identify these motel conversion opportunities in the city. Financial commitments and incentives are low or no interest loans for 20 to 50 years or grants, agreements to jointly purchase with private and public non-government organization partners, and a process in place, which Ray was touching on, to have a point person at the city, like a concierge dedicated person to help fast track through what might be perceived by some as red tape at the city level, so that we can daylight these projects sooner than later. And I'm out. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Ray and Andy, for presenting those slides. And I've just got the last few members of General Committee. So picking up on what Andy was just talking about, there's a specific recommendation that the task force has included tonight that we commit funding from the Community Benefit Reserve towards supportive housing capital within through the Barrie Health Accord, and that we request Simcoe County Council to actually double that contribution, match it to 2 to 1 to create more supportive housing in Barrie. Now, you'll note on the, I will say off the offset, the motion that's on your agenda tonight does make this particular recommendation subject to further discussion with council around exactly how that could and would be used, as there are a number of opportunities today on this, but there could be more going forward. So this one is subject to that discussion, which we can have at a later date, but we'll come back to that when we get to the motion. The recommendation, though, I won't give you the whole pitch for supportive housing. There's some of it in the task force report, and I think most of you are aware that the only way we are going to address chronic homelessness, stop people from ricocheting from our emergency services to the hospital, to a paramedic vehicle, and then back onto the street, is supportive housing. And this council has many times demonstrated we understand that is our best chance to fight chronic homelessness in Barrie, but we need to scale the number of units available. Lucy's Place was an excellent beginning, but the need, of course, is much greater. And ultimately, of course, this lessens the pressure on our emergency services, which are almost half of our budget. So if you're looking at purely the dollars and cents of it all, it makes so much more sense to invest in supportive housing and the services people need, so they don't end up in the emergency services, and then ultimately in the ER or the criminal justice system, or whatever the outcomes are of not being able to help people break that cycle. The second piece is to talk with the county during the service agreement discussion. We've already had some discussion around this, that this year, when the service agreement is discussed between the county and the city, that we ask our staff to create a side letter agreement to that service agreement that commits to some targets around the construction of supportive and social housing. And that language is quite intentional from in our recommendation. Certainly, social housing is something that the county administers, and as CAO Prowse talked about before Christmas, projects occur at different times in different towns. And so you can either be at a short point in the cycle where you've got a project underway or about to happen, which is sort of where we are in Barrie with the Rose Street project. But you can also be a long time from the last one, and it can feel like the provision's not happening at the same pace across the county. I think one of the things as the city grows and the county grows that will benefit us is having a mutual understanding of what that should look like, and setting some targets in an agreement with the county. So that was the recommendation. Next slide. This is the last page, I think, of recommendations. So there are, and I'll deal with the second one first. There are some innovative forms of housing partnership now, including a community land trusts, which the task force talked about early on, that have really shown quite a bit of success in larger cities. And we said we were compelled by the potential of those kinds of organizations to make a difference. So in particular, Barrie Community Land Trust could be very effective, especially given how tight the housing market is here in Barrie. So exploring those is the recommendation. You'll note we don't have a lot of explore this idea type recommendations, members of General Committee. That's on purpose. We wanted to bring you an action plan. And so many of the things that Ray and Andy and I have presented to you to this point are more directive. The recommendation is to go out and do those things. This one needs a little bit of exploration first, but it also has a great deal of potential. The top one is directive. Organize a philanthropy summit to pitch supportive housing and social service projects to impact investors. And we tasked my office with doing that in 2022. Next slide. Okay, a couple others things to note. As I'm sure you saw in the last few pages of our report, there are a number of other additional ideas, some even more bold, that weren't in the recommendations, but we feel are worthy of further work. And those have been captured and presented to you and presented to the public by way of our task force report tonight. Next slide. A big thank you to Michelle Banfield, Shelby and Anna from the Planning Department, Nina Brancaccio, who recorded our task force's work over the course of our meetings over the last 7 months. And I really do publicly want to thank all the members of the task force tonight. They were all volunteers. Lots of collaboration. I can tell you, sometimes when you work with a group, you end up with one or two dominant voices and the others not participating as much. Sometimes you struggle as a group. This group was absolutely remarkable despite coming from very different viewpoints, industry, professional practice, housing advocates, providers, and so forth. Because I think we're all motivated to give you recommendations that go a lot further than previous steps towards addressing the housing crisis. And my last thank you is to you, members of General Committee, for making this a priority back in 2018 when our council sat down and set our strategic priorities. This was one. I probably can't speak for all of you, but I never imagined, I don't think, in 2018 that the housing situation would evolve to where it is today, with prices being more than 50% higher than they were at the start of our term, with rent having risen so steeply and all the consequences that has come with that. But you made that a priority then, you've made it more of a priority since, and you supported the task force's initial recommendations in June, and I thank you for that. So that concludes our presentation, members of General Committee. I thought what we could do now is if we can go back to the screen with everybody on it, we'll take the presentation off for now, but we'll just do questions. And Ray and Andy were kind enough to offer to try and answer some of the questions as well on behalf of the task force's work. So I'll turn it over at this point to you, members of General Committee. Councillor Natalie Harris.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Such a great presentation. My question is about the community housing for veterans. It said it was in progress or something was in brackets. Can you elaborate and let us know how far along that discussion is? That'd be great.
Yeah, thank you for asking. And actually, there's a meeting coming up this week between a couple of the potential providers. Homes for Heroes actually approached me. I was flattered that having done their project, their first project in Kingston, they are seeking 2 others in Ontario, and the Ontario government supported their Kingston project. I've been able to put them together with a couple of potential landowners and the Legion. And Fern Tiefer, who's probably known to many of you as the Veteran Services Officer, and Marcel Vigneault at the Legion, to talk about getting a tiny homes for Heroes community built in Barrie. So those discussions are underway, and I'm hopeful that they'll be bringing something forward to us. But I put them together, and we're trying to facilitate what they need to make it happen. Councillor Riepma?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and a terrific report and something that's very appropriate right now. And as you say, I mean, we've seen housing costs and rents go through the roof in the last 4 years. My question is, the official plan has a target of 10%, and I think the new official plan is going to have somewhat similar wording. A target of 10% of all housing to be built to be affordable. And I know you touched on it in your report on page 11, and you almost touched on it in your presentation tonight, but I wanted to hear a little bit more about that target and how we're going to actually get 10% of every development to be affordable.
I'm actually going to ask Ray to speak to that. We were talking about that in preparing for tonight's general committee. Go ahead, Ray.
Great, thank you, Your Worship, and members of committee. I think the task force struggled with a couple of key points, and Mayor Lehman and Andy Thompson and I talked about it just today. Is that how do you control housing that is ownership based, so it can start off as affordable? So if you spend a lot of time and focus on making sure that it's affordable at the front end, only to see it turn around after the first person that buys in and then just ends up selling it for market, you really don't have affordable housing that you thought you had. So one of the key topics kept circling back at the task force level is focusing on rental, quite frankly. And it's not to mean that ownership affordability is not important, because it is vitally important. And the task force actually didn't want to focus solely on rental to say that affordable housing for ownership purposes is not important, because it really is. But once you get it into the rental element, there's more opportunities to have full disclosure on what the rental rates are, and making sure that people have actually maintained what they said they did from the beginning. The other part of that is that if we can expand the community improvement plans or whatnot, there's opportunities to ensure affordability in those projects as well. But I think your question is a good one, and I think the starting point that the task force felt is we need to increase the supply on the key areas where we can actually see more units built, like in the commercial areas, like on the institutional sites. And then the target is not just 10%. If you will, I think, I don't mean to speak for staff, but I've been heavily reviewing your new OP over the last year in draft forms, and the major transit station areas, the downtown, different areas have different affordable housing targets. So really, from a policy perspective, I think you're going to see it when it is presented to you. The devil is in the details, so to speak, in terms of how do you effectively monitor ownership-based affordability. That's going to be tough, and the task force didn't come up with a solution to that one. The rental one we thought was much more doable. Overall, the core is provide better, smaller, better located, more optimized sites. Ultimately, if you provide the focus on providing that style of housing to meet the city's needs, then affordability will be addressed over a meaningful period of time. Councillor Riedman, it won't happen next month, but it will. That's the task force goal, is to see something that in 5 years we're not looking back and go, oh yeah, there was that report done that we kind of shelved and put on our desk somewhere. Now these are actions that we think some of those hard questions won't be as hard in 5 years when you've got potentially thousands of more units ideally located that are smaller and more affordable to begin with. Hopefully that tries to answer your question, Councillor Riedman.
I'd just add a little postscript on that to say, I think those two recommendations that Andy presented around housing in lieu, similar to cash in lieu of parkland, but as well as the community benefit charge, are a key way to, if the 10% can't be provided as part of the development, there's the mechanism to generate the funding to ensure that it's constructed either by other providers. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate those answers.
Thanks. Deputy Mayor Ward, I have you, and then Councillor McCann.
Thank you, Mary Lehman. Thanks for the presentation. I've got a couple of questions. One is a question of clarification, and I should know this because we've already allowed the housing as a right on institutional lands, but does that housing have to be affordable? And I'm hoping the faith-based community would mostly build affordable, but I wasn't sure if it had to be.
Yeah, there again, it raises the challenge of, do we constrain it to being subsidized, because that's the only way to ensure the affordability. I'm actually I don't know if Ms. Banfield's on. I think she is on the call, but if we can bring her into the call, I'll just ask her to speak to how the new foundations program is approaching that, because it's just been launched with the institutional property owners.
Thank you, Mary Lehman. Hopefully everybody can hear me, and I've had really bad internet all day today, so hopefully I don't freeze. Absolutely, the intent, Deputy Mayor Ward, is for it to be affordable housing, and where it falls on that spectrum, whether it's truly subsidized or supported by one of our partnerships. At this point, it's a little bit too soon to tell. We've just started doing the outreach to get some interest. I believe a press release will be going out shortly. We have an information session scheduled at the end of this month of January. And so, but definitely the focus is going to be on affordable housing, or somewhere on that spectrum. And we don't know who we know that this is going to be a partnership and a collaboration. And so I think it will depend on the sites that come forward, and then the partnerships and the collaborations that we can put together. But certainly the intent of it is for it to be affordable housing.
Okay. Thank you. And I think from answering that question that I know that the housing as a right on the commercial lands will not necessarily be affordable or even rental, or it's any kind of housing. Does it have to be rental, or could that be any kind of housing on commercial lands?
Yeah, so this was something we did talk about back in actually in the summer in one of our first meetings as we started to talk about this. When you start to talk about housing as a right on commercial sites, we're opening up a very large amount of land. Now, there are some of those commercial zones that already permit some degree of housing, but many of them don't. And no, because we can't constrain really by tenure, and these aren't city-owned sites, our ability to set the rent is non-existent. We can't actually set the rent. But we did not intend to make a zoning approval conditional on it being public or private housing, or even market or ownership. So, is there the potential that expensive housing could get built? It's possible. But I think one of the reasons we focused on these sites is we know that the broader issue here is not going to get solved by just subsidized housing being built. I mean, we're not just looking for the sites that public money can be spent on to build social housing or not-for-profit or charitable housing. We know that the market, the private sector, needs to start building more rental apartments at modest rents. And while we can't control the rent directly, we know that if we open up sites that are ideally suited for that, like facing an arterial road, on a shopping center site, or further up on a big box retail site or something like that, by definition, they're not going to be the highest end rental units. That's not the point. And there are a number of these that already exist today. I mean, if you think about some of the developments along Bayfield Street, you probably get a sense of what the potential is in the future. But we got away from that as cities and as a community. We stopped building that kind of thing. And this is a way for us to encourage the private sector, the market, to build more of what we need in more modest rents.
Right. And a couple more questions. One is in the report, there was no mention of there was a mention of nonprofit housing, but no mention at all of Barrie Housing, our municipal nonprofit housing corporation. Was that brought up at all? Do they have a role to play in this?
I guess I'll take that one. In terms of implementing it, we didn't sort of start to say, Simcoe County Housing, you do this, Barrie Housing, you do this. I think it's fair to say that having, now and members of General Committee who are sitting on the board may want to answer this too. I know Barrie Housing is interested in expanding its portfolio in the future, finding a site to build on, but it's probably a single project rather than a systemic kind of thing that that Barrie Housing would be involved in. So hopefully these recommendations may create an opportunity for Barrie Housing to build on a site, because I know when when we looked at the portfolio of sites owned by Barrie Housing, there really was surprisingly little capacity to add density on any of them. They'd deliberately been built out, I think, with site plans that max the density under their current zoning. And even if you rezone them, you would be faced with demolishing an existing building and rebuilding a taller one. And that isn't very efficient compared to building new.
Okay. Another question was, Mr. Duhamel mentioned the discretionary approval items, and it's mentioned in the report as well. Would anything that was being done that needed, for example, a committee of adjustment for setbacks, et cetera, they would not be exempted from those, would they? That wouldn't be within the powers of this discretionary team in the future? Would they be able to bypass committee of adjustment decisions? I guess Ray's
Go
got his
ahead,
hand
Ray.
up.
Yeah.
Thank you, Your Worship, through to Deputy Mayor Ward. The committee wasn't contemplating that type of exemption. It was more, everything from the offsetting costs with the Conservation Authority to, certain, circulation and approval requirements that are required, related to urban design and other things. That it was, a fulsome look at the actual, the true discretionary procedural stuff that is involved in the review of an application, as opposed to the formal approvals that would be required through a committee of adjustment or a zoning bylaw amendment going through council, that sort of thing.
Okay, thanks. One last question is, and this is something that I've often wondered about, is tiny homes. I hate the name tiny homes because it implies that it's going to be like a 10 by 10 shed. What is the minimum? You mentioned up to 400 square feet. What would be the minimum size of a tiny home? Do we know, based on other municipalities?
Andy?
I can answer that, sure. A good size is typically, there's all kinds of different volumes and areas. And we did one in 2003. And we always asked architects to guess what size it was, because it was featured at a number of different home shows. They'd come in there and they'd say, oh, I don't know, 800 square feet, 700 square feet. Nobody could really quite figure it out because the design had really long corridors and light coming in from up high and a loft and all this other stuff. But it was only 8 feet wide, 36 feet long, and 270 square feet. So it mystified architects. If design is done well, it can feel a lot bigger than a shed. So one of the things we gravitated, and this part of what would come out of a best practices meeting, is a 12 by whatever design, 12 by 12, 12 by 16, something like that gives you the feeling of a pretty spacious room that you can build all kinds of furniture into the side. So those compact living scenarios are larger than most apartments in Hong Kong. They're larger than most apartments in Japan. But it takes a different way of living in a space like that to take full advantage of it. So it's really a design thing, but there's lots of great precedents. But I think it has to be done carefully.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Thanks, Barry. Councillor McCann.
Thank you very much, and Happy New Year to all those who I haven't wished Happy New Year to. Andy Thompson, I met you maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I don't know if you remember or not, but you impressed me with your history. You've done a lot of work, I believe, in Europe, and you've seen a lot of different models that I've worked from. And I'm guessing, are you the one that's really pushing the tiny homes on the committee? Is that your scope in this committee?
No, I started pushing that little tiny snowball at the top of a very large mountain back in the 1990s. And now the ministry is giving guidance to municipalities. So I'm not saying that it's me that did it, but I was there with a few other people really kind of trying to get that going. So no, it actually came from other members of the committee.
Okay. All right. Well, then I guess I'll hold back most of my questions then until maybe the ask comes to council. But maybe you can just maybe answer one of these questions for me. Is just the cost per square footage through tiny homes, and do you have an idea with what you're looking for, what it would cost the end user?
It's a complicated answer, but I'll try and put it in a nutshell. When you take all the expensive stuff like a kitchen and a bathroom and you squish it into a smaller space, you drive up the cost per square foot. So cost per square foot is not a good metric for a smaller building because you're inflating that. The thing to look at is the total cost. what is the total cost of a unit, and what does that unit give you in terms of amenity? How many linear feet of kitchen countertop? How many fixtures in the bathroom? How many bedrooms? All that kind of stuff. So if it can do all those things, and your net cost or your gross cost is $150,000, that's the number to look at, because it might be $500 to $800 per square foot, just because you've done this compression.
Okay, I think maybe looking at math a little differently. So you're saying it's going to cost roughly about 100. How much for a 400 square foot tiny home?
A lot of the stuff that's on our boards right now, we're targeting $150,000 to $250,000 per unit, and that's on a size range anywhere from 280 square feet to 800 square feet.
Okay. Okay. So you're looking under $200 square foot, then is what you're looking at.
Ideally, and that's where a lot of the housing.
That is the number you want to reach,
from.
right? It's 200.
That's
is
right.
Really, for this to be affordable, I guess maybe I should have started with that. Okay, that was kind of the first question, and then you didn't really talk about it, Mayor Lehman, but maybe you did. I just didn't fully digest and understand. You have here on page 17 that you're going to start immediately organization for Philanthropy Summit to pitch supportive housing. Is that a co-op problem? Are you pitching a co-op? Is that what you're pitching here, or are you looking for people to lend money at a lower interest rate, or what's the purpose of that?
So if you're referring to the summit recommendation, that's what you're talking about, the philanthropy summit.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's a meeting. That's gather people together, talk about the opportunity to invest and try and recruit impact investors. So impact investment's really grown in Canada. The big banks, the Royal Bank Foundation, for example, places about $5 billion a year in impact investment. And, it's obviously part of the corporate social responsibility. Different companies have different goals, but there are some very specific types of impact investors focused on social, supportive, subsidized housing. So they are interested in investing in these types of projects. The recommendation from the task force is that I use my office to try and organize an event where we would bring in these types of philanthropists and impact investors, see if we could convince them, match them up to projects in Barrie, try and get that investment happening in our community. It's certainly happening in a number of other cities. And I should note, the Barrie Community Foundation's done amazing work over the last year to amp up its activity in impact investment and specifically housing. You probably saw a press release from them about 3 months ago that they have a specific housing fund now. In a lot of cities, this is placing tens of millions of dollars in investment every year. And I think we mentioned them in the report that we could potentially work with them to do something like that here in Barrie.
Okay, I appreciate that deep answer. I guess the question I have is, did you look at co-op housing, like cooperative housing, and having that model? Is that something you looked and scratched off, or is that something that is still going to be looked at?
That's a good question. I might get Ray or at least Andy to jump in on this, because we did have some discussion around the sort of reemergence of co-op. I mean, co-op housing was big in the 70s, and there were a few that were set up over the last sort of 20 years. Carla Ladd, the former CAO, had some folks here in Barrie that started to think about doing it here. Because we have Barrie Housing, the municipal nonprofit housing, that's been the focus. We do have co-op housing here in Barrie. 80 Edge Hill is probably one of the better known buildings. But the task force didn't recommend setting up a new co-op. What we did, I think, show some interest in was the community land trust model. Andy, I don't know if you want to speak to this, but maybe reflecting some of those discussions we had.
I could speak to it briefly. I mean, where this has been done really effectively, and it's not a great example because it's certainly not affordable, is in wine country in California, where we lived and worked. In Sonoma and Napa County, all of the buildable area was taken up with vineyards because the value of the land is so high. So the only development opportunities for hotels and tourism was on former trailer parks. So the smart developers bought those trailer parks and grandfathered the structure into boutique luxury hotels. And they developed these really beautiful little units. They were literally trailers on wheels, but with incredible landscaping and planters all around them. And they just had this really nice feel. So people could buy into now the same model can translate over to affordable housing. When you have the units and you deploy those units, you can structure it as a vacant land condominium, right? So that the people that they can buy and own the units and then pay a pad lease for the site. And that takes the cost of housing down by half, because when you look at any structure of the building and the land cost, the land is a significant part of it. So if a city like Barrie is fronting the cost or supporting the cost of the land structure, then you can deploy those units and the person is buying the unit. Can you then move them like a trailer? Yeah, you can. So you put them on a rigid chassis, they can get relocated from one site to the other, but in most cases they don't move. So that's part of the answer, I guess, but there's other forms of housing. If you look at the Bain Co-op in Toronto, that's a great example of a co-op that's been waitlisted for, 100. Everybody wants to get in that so badly. It's waitlisted for 20 years.
Right?
Hi, Mayor Lemon to Councilor McCann. I think the other thing the committee thought about is focusing on rental, focusing on supply. But you make a great point about cooperative housing. The committee thought that if there's certainly developers who are going to struggle to deliver affordable housing. They won't intrinsically object to the idea of being able to deliver it, but they will struggle with how to deliver it, particularly in a condominium, freehold tenure scenario. So one of the thoughts is if there's cash in lieu of affordable housing, for example, if the pot were to grow, now all of a sudden, if there was actual money, so developer comes along and provides 5% and tops up the rest with cash, or provides 0 and provides 10% in cash, or whatever the scenario is. If you can get a pot of money, you could explore co-ops. You could explore the third recommendation 11 in the promising ideas is issue an RFP for different options. Once you have some money to be able to explore the redevelopment of the institutional sites, or like you actually have something to work with there, you might be able to really get creative. I think that the committee was probably a little bit more meat and potatoes, just looking at we need to move the needle and not just talk about it. And that was really a struggle with I think a few task force meetings. We had to get past we're not talking about enough substance yet. We really need something that's going to produce thousands of units over the next 5 to 10 years. How do we do that? There's going to be great ways to do 10 units on a site, or 15 units on some other site. But how do we really make a difference so that we all look back in 5 years? And I think we use that analogy quite a few times, looking back in 5 years and not just having, those were some great ideas that really didn't amount to much of anything. We tried to avoid those outcomes. So anyway, hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yeah, I appreciate all the answers. It kind of got a huge variance there. I was just looking at the model of co-op, so I appreciate all three of your answers. But I do want to stick with the cooperative model. And I'm not sure if Mr. Thompson, if he's still on or not. I've lost him there. I do believe that, with the limited research that I've done on affordable housing and housing affordability, the co-op structure where you have a group of investors actually investing in the project, so they actually will be able to control any rent increases for the future. To me, that just seemed like the smartest idea, because what control would Barrie City Council have for us to spend all this effort and spend all this money, spend all this resource into these units that are affordable, and then the owners just selling for high prices? And I think Mr. Harvey, or Councilor Harvey, brought that up earlier. And I just don't know what barriers we have for that. And if the discussion is not for tonight, I accept that. If it is, if there's a kind of a quick answer, I wouldn't mind getting it.
Sorry, folks, I froze out there, Councillor McCann, so I just came in on the tail end of your question. I don't know, Ray, was that a question to Ray or to myself or Andy?
All three of you. I think it's a pretty broad question, right? It's kind of for the.
Well, I'll start if you froze out there, Mayor Lehman.
Sorry about that, folks.
Through you to Councillor McCann. I think that you're pointing out, a very key point is that the task force talked right at the very front end of the meetings, is talking about when you build affordable housing. If you do obtain affordable housing that's ownership based, how do you secure that long term? You can do that through tools like a community improvement plan, where if they're getting some sort of financial incentives through a CIP program. But there aren't a lot of opportunities to really tie down, particularly ownership based. So that's why just increasing the supply of rental hopefully would drop us out of the top 5 of the 5 most expensive cities in the country, for example, as immediately moving the needle. That's why we focused on rental. That's why we focused on those sites that would provide the most number of units so that it increased supply. So we tried to get past the let's increase the supply of affordable ownership and try to instead focus on affordable rental. And that doesn't mean that a co-op wouldn't be a great idea. There's, like, I don't think, the committee by any stretch of the imagination has the the be all and end all of every good idea on affordable housing. We just wanted to make the needle move. Maybe there's a task force every other year on this subject to make it better. Many, in my world in planning, things get better. It's evolutionary, not necessarily, we hit a grand slam home run right away. We have to just get better and better at doing it. I think this is the start, trying to do it better. It's just my thought.
Yeah, and Mr. Hamel, I can recognize that this is the start, you mean, but definitely want to help as much as I can, starting off on the right foot, right? And just the co-op model would be nice if you guys do come back to see if that is a model that we could entertain. I guess two more questions I have, and then I'll let somebody else speak, is the $5 million, obviously on page, sorry, I did have it until Mr. Hamel, page 16. When you come for that ask, you're obviously going to have much more detail on the impact of that $5 million, because quite frankly, we probably need hundreds of millions of dollars to resolve this. So I just want to maybe make a statement, not really ask a question there. And then the last question I have, are you planning on donating the DCs if people are planning, and I would be shocked if that wasn't discussed in your committee. And that is a question for tonight, if you don't mind.
Sure. So yeah, that's a real challenge, Councilor McCann, because one of the first things that we should do as a municipality, if we could, would be to waive development charges on affordable housing. I mean, but we've been around that horn as a council, this council and the previous council. And the problem is, under legislation, we have to then cross-subsidize whatever money we give away, whether it's to manufacturers, and council has chosen to discount industrial DCs on several occasions, or for affordable housing. And so you got a right pocket, left pocket problem, which is if we cut those DCs, we're going to take the funding that we might have otherwise spent on affordable housing and fund the DC reduction for market development. So, that puts us, council, in a very difficult position. And I will say it's not something we've ever resolved, because I've often felt that our interpretation of the legislation and the way municipalities are forced to handle that issue constrains our ability to do good things. Specifically, exactly what you're talking about, the development charges that become a very expensive piece of a project. Just to your broader point, though, Councillor McCann, because I think it's a good one. I think this task force started with the awareness that there's not enough public money in the world, even if we thought there was, to be reallocated or found or spent. Not enough tax money in the world at the local level to be spent to even move the needle on the price of housing in Barrie. And the price, remember, is the rent, not just the cost of a home. So, Barrie Council does not have anywhere near the financial resources that would be necessary to fund enough housing construction to lower rent. So we got to target that. We got to target that at the people that most need the help, which is why this task force came forward and said, if we're going to actually spend capital dollars of city money, which could be spent on the other 100 things we need to do as a municipality, we're going to spend it on supportive housing specifically, getting people out of our emergency services, getting them off the street, and addressing the most vulnerable. And that's a very small number in the overall picture, because the overall picture, as Ray says, we need thousands of units to move the needle on rent. And that's why you're seeing the rest of the recommendations be about how do we get the private market, private developers, to build way more rentals. We open up more land and all the other things that are in there. But I think the point that you're making is a good one, which is, and it was a bit tough when we brought forward these recommendations, because we knew we're going to at some point ask council for funding for supportive housing, but we don't want that to be conflated with like that's going to bring down rent. It's not. The only thing that's going to bring down rent, as Mr. DeHamel says, is a fundamental change in the way stuff gets built in Barrie, so that we have way more rental apartments. Oh, still on mute there.
Yeah,
Councillor
sorry for
McCann.
that.
Yeah.
I guess maybe quickly, Mayor Lehman, just timelines, like what's the progression here?
So what Councillor Kungle's motion tonight is, as a member of the task force, is asking of council is to adopt the recommendations in principle and ask staff to report back in a relatively short period of time as to how and when they can do them. So that's the first part of the motion tonight. There's a couple specific pieces that we'd like to get moving on right away. It was important, I think, that what's now called new foundations, the institutional piece, got started back in June, because we're now literally rolling that out to landowners, and that's actually generating projects already, just the very first few inquiries. So right away, I guess, is the short answer, Councillor McCann. But I will say, to be fair to our staff, the successful delivery of these in a short time frame, we need a person to live and breathe it. We need a staff member whose job is nothing but affordable housing. And the good news, I think, on that front, as hopefully you saw in the motion, is the Housing Accelerator Fund federally might actually provide us some funding for that position. But we think that's foundational. Got to get somebody in place who's living and breathing this, and then they can action everything as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Councillor Elwin, have you next?
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. And thank you so much for the presentation and for the hard work of the task force members. Some really awesome recommendations coming out of here. I have a couple questions. One of my favorite recommendations is on slide 16 around the $5 million from the Community Benefit Reserve. I think capital funding for supportive and social housing is such a big barrier to this problem, to solving this problem that we face in our city. So I'm wondering if beyond that $5 million and the philanthropy summit, if the task force looked at any other methods or tools that we could use to raise capital, other financial partners potentially to raise capital for these supportive and social housing projects that we so desperately need.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, so the Philanthropy Summit, the impact investment is one way to do that. So let's organize a summit, show people the opportunities to invest in those projects in Barrie. Now, we need to do some work locally to make sure we've got some good investments to show people. But as I think we all know, there are several already, but it'd be nice to have a few more, I think. I think the federal funding is a key piece, Councillor Elwin. And this is one of the reasons why writing federal grant applications is explicitly in the job description for that position, members of General Committee. The federal, we have not seen the federal funding in Barrie. There was some subsidy for the Dunlop West apartment building, which was a market building, but we really have not seen that investment in supportive or social housing in Barrie at the federal level. To be frank, or at the provincial level, but it's really the federal government that have the big dollars on this and have made the big commitments in their last election campaign. So I would say those are the two immediate targets: impact investment and federal dollars, federal housing dollars.
Okay, thank you. I do have another question. So when we were talking earlier about the official plan and those types of tools available to us, zoning tools to encourage affordable units in all new developments, I'm wondering if the task force plans to engage on the OP in any way. I think, it'd be nice to see some stronger affordable housing targets within the OP and maybe some additional tools to help make those targets, to help meet those targets. Is there any plan to look at that policy piece?
I'm going to let Andy and Ray respond to that. We don't have a specific recommendation, recognizing that the official plan policies were pretty much done before the task force was making our recommendations. But of course, that's council's discretion. But Andy and Ray, I'm sure you have thoughts on this.
I do. If I could, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Elwin, the question you had previously about raising capital was a really interesting one for me, because before the holidays, the OAA participated in a meeting with Mark Carney, and the president of Vancity Community Investment Bank. And one of the questions that came up was, how can we possibly transition to a net zero in architecture, all the buildings, the infrastructure we have across Canada? The money's not going to come out of the federal coffer. Money's not going to come from the municipal coffer. Why are banks not divesting from fossil fuel infrastructure development and investing in green bonds for transitioning and transforming housing? So that was the question. And Mark Carney was saying he's been proselytizing for that cause, to have structured bonds for transitioning to deep green retrofits for existing buildings and new construction. But the same answer could be applied to housing. If you had an investment vehicle structured like a bond, the public could buy into it with a guaranteed return, 4% over 10 years or something like that. Banks or local institutional partners like Meridian could cooperate. I think it would behoove the city to try and solicit a bond program from somebody like that, if it's even allowed through the Municipal Act. But I think that would be a great way to raise capital.
Interesting. Thank you.
Ray, did you specifically on the affordable housing percentages in the OP as well?
Sure. Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Irwin. That's a good question, Councillor Irwin. The committee didn't specifically review the OP in that context. I think the committee did feel that although not specifically discussing the OP, it's the broader issue looking out 5 years from now is not a policy piece, but more of an action-oriented piece to see see the supply increase fundamentally. So, I think, the OP does a great job of increasing the expectation of affordable housing, the draft one, and provides higher targets in those key areas that are, where you want the, higher percentages. Ultimately you'll debate that around the planning committee table, and ultimately at council when staff present the new OP to you. But, specific to the committee, we were very focused on looking out 5 years and saying, what is going to bring thousands of units to the city of Barrie? That's going to help affordable housing specifically. It's also just going to make everything more affordable as a whole. So hopefully that provides some assistance.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. Sounds like the ball's in our court on the policy piece. So we'll have a discussion on that when that comes to planning committee. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Councillor Owen. Councillor Morales.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I'll start with yourself, Mr. Duhamel. I noticed the absence of a reference to the Committee of Adjustment in the task force recommendations. So I wanted to touch on that a bit. Is there any reason why it wasn't included as a recommendation, specifically increasing the scope of the Committee of Adjustment? And I have two anecdotes as to my question, and they're very important to where I'm asking the question. I will always remember that one house on Edge Hill, maybe 2.5 years ago, where it came to council for technically a rezoning. But one of the first and maybe only questions, let's be honest, I probably asked more than one question, was why is it here at rezoning? Why is it not a Committee of Adjustment? Because it was a legacy. It was one of those, like, it had been in use. They technically needed to bring it up to par. Parking was already there, etc. So, and from an affordability perspective, not just renting, but also purchasing and affecting the market, as you know, in your industry, going through a rezoning process for all the reports and planners, et cetera, involved at the time, and the soft costs, some people call it red tape, is significantly higher through a rezoning than a Committee of Adjustment application. Another example that I was made aware of probably in October, November is, and I'll keep the information general because I don't want to identify, there was a house in the downtown Barrie area, a residential house, or technically a commercial house that was bought. And the individual that bought it, their intent was to gut it and put 4 residential units, make them nice, vinyl plank flooring, good kitchens, good retrofits, good fire safety, all that stuff. They wanted to make money, but they wanted to add 4 new units to the market. They ended up selling it and not doing that. And it is my understanding that it is likely not just going to be commercial office space. So all of us missed out on the opportunity of having 4 humble units, because one of the obstacles they ran into was they couldn't get around the parking requirement. The way the property is built out on the land, it was right up to the street, basically no access to the backyard off the site, just basically no way to provide parking. And because maybe they didn't explore it well enough for the city, not saying they did or they didn't, but they essentially decided, you know what, it's not worth the hassle. They listed on the market, they got rid of it. So it's one of those things where I'm wondering if the task force looked at the scope of the committee of adjustment, and maybe there's an opportunity to increase the scope that they can handle. So projects, what people are calling now gentle density infill, to increase the buildup of the missing middle, where maybe duplexes might be appropriate, triplexes, if we're ambitious enough, maybe even fourplexes, specifically with things in regard to parking variances, and I would call it gentle density of that nature. Did the committee explore the scope of the committee of adjustment?
Ray, you could give your view. No is the short answer, Councilor Morales, but Ray, Andy's probably best positioned as a member to address that. I don't think we talked about your committee's remit. Go ahead.
Well, I could just say that's a matter of provincial policy filtering down through the city, and we really need to look at the 4 tests. And I think if you've got good committee members that understand the issues, the global issues around affordability and what you're trying to accomplish in Barrie, those are demonstrably desirable, right? So that's the 3rd test. It's meeting the official plan that lines up the zoning, and is it minor? And that's where really we get a chance to weigh in. If it's going to cause a huge problem, then it's not minor. But if it has relatively small or no impacts, then certainly I think the current committee, as it's meeting now, would be open to those kinds of things. So.
But yeah, Mr. Duhamel, thank you, Mayor Lehman and Mr. Thompson.
Mayor Lehman, through to Councilor Morales. What I could add to that is that some of the focus of the report recommendations, Councilor Morales, is to look at adding permissions onto commercial sites, adding permissions, as you already have done, onto institutional sites, and then to provide an opportunity through your new comprehensive zoning bylaw to provide more progressive standards. And that's really a tool where you could potentially avoid the committee of adjustment entirely. I will say that your bylaw, in large part, I've had the benefit of working in Barrie for 25 years, and I've known the zoning framework going back much longer. It really hasn't substantively changed going back to at least 1985. And I think your staff are doing a transformative new OP. That's how they've described this new OP process. They can look at the zoning bylaw provisions in the same way. I will use the Hewitts and Salem areas as examples where they didn't zone specifically for townhouses and singles, that there's one zone that allows both. They're much smaller rear yard setbacks and much greater coverage provisions. And there's a lot of ways to progressively zone to allow less need to go to the committee of adjustment. And I think part of it is really, legacy zoning bylaws, provisions that have been carried forward over decades. And it's time for an update. And fortunately, your staff are doing exactly that in the first couple of quarters of this year. So hopefully that helps a little bit too.
Perfect, thank you. My other question here was, I saw the slide about reducing or waiving parking requirements for non-residential lands and redevelopments for certain classes of development. Incredible idea. Grayfields, as it was on the slide, is something that's really vital for Barrie to essentially build that Bayfield. And that's where the appropriate density to address our supply issue needs to be. Is there a reason why the committee didn't also put basically that sentence, but having the word for non-residential lands and for residential lands? So what I mean specifically is, if those ambitious targets for reduction of parking requirements were also made for non-residential lands in appropriate areas, it would really move the needle. Again, going back to your Grand Slam analogy, the moment Bayfield Mall, possibly some of the other malls and possibly some of the other parcels, I'll keep it generic, I don't want to target anybody. If they all come on grid, they all bring an application and they all add collectively 5,000 units, great, that's a grand slam. And actually that's a cycle. However, that's a long wait. That a lot of things have to go right. It's a lot of public meetings. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of labor in the market. So sometimes you just want a clutch single. Sometimes you want a ground rule double. And then maybe that means on a different kind of road that is appropriate, they can achieve the same with a much reduced parking requirement, maybe even aspiring to the levels that the city of Toronto has just recently, brought forward, and they're going down the pipeline. So is there so to refine the question, is there a reason why the task force didn't include residential lands in that little blurb in addition to non-residential lands?
I think we did, but go ahead, Ray. Yep.
Yeah, Mayor Lehman to Councilor Morales. The recommendation is to exempt certain classes of development, and that's specifically what the thought process was. Affordable and supportive housing was the one to talk about the exemption to apply to. That could be expanded, of course, if it works well and it makes sense. But the points, maybe the slides weren't as clear as we should. And I reviewed those slides, and I apologize if it wasn't as clear. But ultimately, it's the shared parking is one tool between commercial and residential, as an example. And the alternative is also to outright exempt parking, make it market based, and so rather than being prescriptive, it would be more permissive in that sense to allow a different amount of parking to be built, similar to the way that all of Dunlop Street in downtown is right now. There's no parking requirement for that.
Perfect. And Mr. Duhamel, you're correct. My apologies. My brain combined the preceding sentence that said non-residential and combined it with the following sentence. You are right. Just to clarify, as everybody kind of jumped in, that is the recommendation. So that's great. And then finally, Mr. Thompson, I'll kind of start with you for this question. The Legion, and I don't want to get too into the weeds on this one, so it's like a very quick question, very quick answer, because everybody has been patient with me and we have a lot tonight. The Legion is an incredible site, and I am in principle supportive of tiny homes. I understand the general concept. I definitely don't have near your experience, but one of the things that I understand to be true of the Legion site, it's a prime site. Some people call it a prime redevelopment. Some people call it different words, and basically it's ready to go. And because of its proximity to roads, highway access, retail, it's prime for density. Tiny homes in the U.S., where the industry is a lot more further down the line, tiny homes tend to go into the outskirts of cities or towns. They tend to go into areas where developers can't attract financing money. Basically, infill areas, in the sense where like self-storage sometimes goes into areas where nobody really wants to develop to live or things of that nature. So highest and best use is the guiding principle with that. You build the highest and best use of the land. Is there, and I know that there's other sites being explored beside the Legion. I heard that loud and clear from the presentation, and we're at the preliminary stage. And by no means do I want to detrain that discussion for anything toward veterans or that. But from a very basic question, and I'm more than happy to take this online once I get a basic answer, is there, basically, I'm sure there's an awareness that the Legion site is in a prime location and maybe could support higher density and therefore get us more units and bang for buck than something as low density as a tiny home community.
So I'll jump in because kind of unfair to make Andy answer that. I'm the one who's been talking with the Legion and Homes for Heroes and others. But Andy might chime in when I'm done about the tiny home communities and where they locate in cities. It's not up to us what the highest best use of the Legion is. It's up to the Legion. The Legion is a very, very important part of our community. That Legion Hall continues to be a really critical resource for our veterans. And so to be clear, because it's a public meeting here, there are no plans to change the Legion site, remove anything that's there. What is being examined is there any excess property there that could potentially be part of a tiny homes community? There are other sites that could be part of it. But one of the things I wanted to just respond with Councilor Morales is, if Legion Branch 147 ultimately decided it wanted to do something different with the property, that would be entirely up to them. It's not a matter of city policy. What I'm trying to do is connect those two organizations, because the support for the veterans who would live in a tiny homes community comes from the Legion. It's done in partnership, and that's part of what Homes for Heroes is about. So the task force would never recommend what the Legion should do with its property. I think the reason we included that in this report is because there is this opportunity right now with Homes for Heroes for communities around the city. And I wanted to, I think, update you on the work that I've been doing along with the Legion and Homes for Heroes. But I don't think the choice on this is up to City Council. If the Legion wanted to come back at a future date and do something different with its property, obviously they would apply to us. But Andy, did you want to speak about tiny homes communities?
Only just briefly. I mean, one of the advantages of them is as a structural unit that is 8 or 12 wide, these can legally be moved on roadways. So even if they were on a temporary site, they can go from one site to another. So there's a kind of portability aspect that you do not have with conventional real estate, especially tiny homes on wheels, or THOWs.
So, Mr. Thompson, sorry, let me just refine my question. I believe the wording of my question was the task force, not what City Council should dictate. So with the task force, right, we're talking about the task force presentation. Without, and again, maybe this is an offline conversation. Maybe this is a privileged information. Maybe this is to be determined. Stay tuned, right? I don't know. That's where my question started. Tiny home communities, while obviously it is the wishes of the landowner, whether it be Bayfield Mall, a church, or the Legion, is there a limiting factor that the committee knows that, okay, the reason the Legion isn't even considering doing a 6-story mid-rise building on a very rectangular, very well located site is because of X, Y, and Z, where I would then hear that answer and go, oh, okay, that makes sense. This is why they're considering as the mayor said, connecting the Legion with the appropriate body so they can have discussions on their own. Is there something like is there some inside baseball of context as to why a lower density tiny home community is something that was even put on the slides versus more of a mid density infill that is appropriate to say at this time, or not quite?
Through Mr. Mayor to Councilor Morales, I don't have anything to do with the Legion. I don't know what's going on with the site. I know Legions across Canada are considering this as a program.
Yep.
There's a need for housing for veterans, and that's one of the ways they're solving it. A new purpose-built mixed use or higher density or even medium density building is a significant investment, whereas I think these smaller things are not. That's probably why they're happening. But there's no insider baseball happening with the committee.
Perfect. And sometimes, you know what, sometimes a ground rule single is better than going for a grand slam and going for 6 stories. And if it gets a couple of units, the tiny home, at the end of the day, it's better than nothing. So I definitely appreciate the connection that all of the members have been making. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilor Morales. Councilor Harvey, you're next. Questions.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I really do like the whole cash in lieu of affordable housing concept, because so far we have not been hitting our targets, especially with all the builds coming in. I can't remember the last time we actually had one that was hitting that 10% level coming in. And I think this will help stimulate some of the other ones that we know are in the wings waiting for some push from the other levels of government. I guess my big concern though would be with the builds opposed to the rentals, because with the rentals we can obviously put things in place to ensure that the rentals do stay affordable for a 10 or a 20-year period. But when it comes to the new builds, and if let's say a project does come forward and has that 10% of units that they intend on selling at an affordable rate, was there any discussion or consideration about partnering with someone similar to like Habitat for Humanity, let's say, where there's appropriate screening of those families to ensure that the people with the appropriate income levels are getting those affordable units, opposed to people like you and I that really should not be getting those affordable units? Because just quickly, I could sit here and think of many ways that a system like this could be manipulated unless we put some barriers in place to ensure that these units are being sold to the appropriate income level families that we have here in the city.
Yeah, I'll offer something. Andy might want to chime in. I don't think the task force, I actually think Ray mentioned this in the presentation, I don't think the task force has solved that issue of how you ensure affordability over time, Councillor Harvey. I think one of the, we were sort of operating with, this urgent and pressing need we have for supportive housing to address homelessness, the most vulnerable. And then the much bigger issue, like, the affordability issue, just generate a lot more modestly priced supply to try and bring down rent. I think that issue of how do you keep it affordable, there isn't a legal mechanism that I've heard of that is a very good one if you don't own the project. I will tell you this though, in Halton region, the 10% affordable units are actually transferred, the ownership of them, to a nonprofit manager. So social services in Halton region actually owns units in some large buildings, which are literally given to them by the developer as their percentage contribution to affordable housing. And then they're managed by the social service provider. It takes people off the wait list and it's kept affordable. So that's the best solution I've heard of. We don't do that here. It's not something that Simcoe County has done historically, but that's the kind of solution that might be out there. Andy, I don't know if you wanted to weigh in on this with some of your experience elsewhere.
No, I just think the question that Councillor McCann raised about co-ops is a good tack, and I think maybe one of the recommendations that could be added to the report overall is just looking at the soft structures for creating affordable housing, raising capital, and maintaining affordability over time. That's all of that kind of belongs in a nutshell.
Yeah, great. Yeah, no, I'm just concerned. Like, I mean, I would rather see the transfer of that differential of wealth going to the appropriate families opposed to going to someone that is obviously of a certain wealth that they don't need that, and obviously it's those low income families that need programs like Habitat for Humanity and such forth. But actually, your solution that you just spoke of in Halton, Mayor Lehman, may be a very good solution or something to definitely consider moving forward too. My other question would be, when it comes to the CIP, I know we've already got, and it's actually mentioned in the minutes from the April meeting, that we were ranked #1 in the GTA for contributing to housing affordability through our CIP. Is there any consideration of enhancing that even further? Or now that we're already #1, are we in good enough place when it comes to the CIP? Because again, unless we've got the provisions in place, they may not be as effective as we would like to, because obviously this is a different piece than the supportive housing. Because I think the supportive housing, a lot of what was said tonight is going to really inject a lot of movement on that piece of it. I just don't want to see that things get missed on the other end of it. So I'm just wondering what your intent on the CIP piece of it is.
So just so I understand the question, sorry, Councillor Harvey, that you mean, are we recommending any changes to the community improvement plans?
Yeah, because the CIP has been used for affordable housing, especially when it comes to rental units, and that's where we've put things in place to ensure that the rental does stay within the affordable range for extended periods of time, 10, 20 years type of deal.
Yeah, and again, I'll ask my colleagues to give their perspective from their task force discussions, but I think we actually moved away from the CIP in terms of our recommendations, partly because of that issue I was talking about earlier, where the difference between the amount of money that we feasibly can commit and the number of doors that it gets built is so wide that every bit helps. And I think the people who build subsidized or supportive housing in Barrie would tell you, everything. Oh, sorry, folks. Can you hear me? I glitched out. Good. I wasn't saying anything you need.
We lost about 30 seconds.
Okay. Sorry about that, folks. Maybe I'll ask Andy and Ray, just because it does say I'm unstable here, which I think all you know, I'm unstable. No, we moved away from the CIP, Councillor Harvey, because the scale of the need and the scale of the amount of money that we can put towards CIP incentives is so far apart. We're just not going to get enough units built through CIP financial incentives, I don't think. But Ray, did you want to speak to this?
Yeah, I would echo that, and I'd build on it, is that I have the benefit of working with a lot of developers, as you know, Councillor Harvey, and going through the CIP program hasn't been #1 on their list of priorities, because there's not enough incentive, unfortunately, if you're looking at it in that sense, to make it worth their while ultimately. So the committee focused in other ways Number one, funding, as you know, in there we talked about the cash in lieu. If a developer just doesn't want to or can't build affordable housing, that's not their area of expertise. The community benefit charge may be an opportunity to do that, focusing on supply and getting more rental. So the committee took a different approach. It doesn't mean that the CIP isn't a great tool for a great number of projects, but we were more looking at, 5 years from now, do we have thousands of units in the system rather than dozens or 100 sort of thing.
Great, thanks. Those are only my questions, just because we're starting to get.
Thanks, Councillor Harvey. Councillor Harris, Jim Harris.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Lehman. I'll be quick, and there's been a lot of great questions answered, and thank you to yourself and Mr. Thompson and Mr. Duhamel for your work on this. It's really quite hopeful. Just a quick question, and I know that some of the work will be done. 4B talks about, identifying the existing supply and demand in the housing market. In speaking with some of the housing providers or social service providers who would be involved in supportive housing and in supporting our most vulnerable, which I believe that I heard correctly, that was really one of the key priorities coming out of this. We already know that, and that's a smaller group, thankfully, but it's a really, it can be obviously challenging given the economics for people with what they receive for social assistance to find housing. With that noted, I mean, in my understanding of Barrie and the history of housing, that first level of housing is rooming houses. And I know, just kind of curious, and if the plan includes rooming house type arrangements, which certainly would be the first movement from maybe a shelter to that step, and you'd be able to afford that hopefully with a pension, disability pension, or a social services check. Or has that gone the way of the dodo, that the rooming house just isn't part of the plan moving forward? It really is about small individual units that are inclusive of all the things somebody would need in a place.
Andy, do you want to talk about that one?
Yeah, there's a trend coming out of Toronto. Bosley Real Estate has hosted a number of sessions on this, and Leslie Gaynor is a key spokesperson for it. But there's a lot of seniors housing that is that the OAA convened and put together a study on long-term care, and some of the best models out of Europe are co-ownership models. So when you've got the real estate industry kind of promoting co-ownership models, co-purchasing, and the agreements, when those are structured by the realtors and by mortgage brokers and the people in that industry, where you've got a fair and equitable contract for purchasing and living, it's not a solution to the rooming houses. That's really something for the supportive housing providers that I don't know a lot about. But I can definitely see there being a space to facilitate support and have those conversations in Barrie for supportive housing, where a group of 4 families purchases a unit together, or 2, or all these different structures where seniors can live independently in a shared building. I certainly know there's a number of those projects in and around Ross and Wellington.
Actually, our local chapter of CARP has been pushing to try and get some co-housing built in Barrie for a little while. They had sort of a bit of a false start with the first project, but I've now got another one that seems to be getting some traction. So thanks for thinking of that, Andy. I think that's one of the directions, Jim, that it could really work.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, seniors, in this challenge of keeping their housing and being able to coordinate together, it actually solves the other problem of isolation, which is loneliness is a big problem for seniors as well. So there's maybe a future in supporting those options. So thank you again for your support in this important work.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Any other questions for us as a task force? Okay, the motion will be up very shortly. Can I just reiterate again my thanks to the members of the task force, Councillor Kungl, Ray, and Andy, who are here tonight, and particularly for tag teaming this presentation, answering all those questions, and to all the other members of the task force who I know are most of whom, if not all, are on the call tonight. Thank you all for your work. And with that, we will move from the presentation into the items that were held, which really are just the 2. And the first one that was held, I'm just trying to see, I think it was Councillor Jim Harris that held the staff report on the Holly naming. So we will go over to you, Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I'd like to put the item on the floor as written, and I have an amendment. And the amendment would be that the Heritage Berry Committee be consulted on the development of an installation at the community center to showcase the history of the Holly community, and I can speak to that.
Okay, so that'd be a new paragraph to the motion. Go ahead, Councillor Harris.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm just pulling up my wording here. I have a potential conflict. So I'm going to be removing myself from the vote, as I believe I may have a perceived code of conflict conduct, as my family members own a real estate business themselves. So I'm going to turn my video off.
Okay, thanks very much. Madam Clerk, has Councillor Natalie Harris's potential conflict been recorded?
Yes, Mayor Lehman, it has.
Okay, thanks. Sorry about that, Councillor Natalie Harris. Didn't see that. Didn't see you waving there. Okay, Councillor Jim Harris, you can now go ahead with your amendment.
Great, thank you, Mayor Lehman. So, you know, my effort here is not to in any way delay or interrupt the effort in the recommended motion, but it's to add that one key element around referring the item to Heritage Berry. And it's really born, and I gave credit to a letter from a resident, Doug and Bernadette Lougheed, who really spoke to the importance of the Holly area and the hamlet of Holly to people in this community. And, you know, the name on the building is one thing, and the building isn't Holly, and the building isn't part of Holly's longtime heritage, but the area is. And is there a way that we can honor a heritage, the hamlet of Holly, in some way in this building for the future? So it really, and you know, Mr. Lougheed sent some pictures that represented the history of Holly, the people of Holly, and some of the activities. I didn't know it was a logging center. So these are some great opportunities that have been presented that we can really, you know, for the long term, represent what this area was and what it meant to people, and you know, have a legacy for Holly that maintains over time. So that's really, you know, the initiative. And I have confidence, and I've had a chance to speak to Councillor Reitman, who's the chair of Heritage Berry, that, you know, this would be something Heritage Berry would want to take on and provide recommendations to honor Holly. So that's really what this is simply meant to do.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Comments on the amendment? Councillor Kungle and Councillor Reitman, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Harris. I love that additional amendment. A couple of questions I guess I'll frame with it is, because it comes to mind things I've seen from a healthcare sector, from changes where you can have a storyboard through a hospital. I've lived and done work in Kingston where you can have a historical walking tour. And so I'd love to hear back, well, I know it'll be public around the minutes for Heritage, but what might be considered maybe even as a broader scope, if that's possible, because we've got the Holly Library, and I even learned quite a lot through Mr. Lougheed's correspondence. And so, you know, I keep imagining, oh, what a beautiful thing to explore that I actually didn't appreciate in the past. So I didn't know, and maybe it could be, you can refer this question to Councillor Reitma as the chair of Heritage, but does the Heritage Committee reach out to residents such as Mr. Lougheed, who seem to have a wealth of actual historical content and literature, and I think has had some heritage background and expertise? Would they be able to actually look at understanding what could be possible and what exists out there that might be in the hands of a resident?
Yeah, thank you. I can answer that. And Catherine, if you want to jump in, absolutely. We would want to go to the subject matter experts, and clearly Mr. Lougheed has already shown us some wonderful examples of the history of Holly. So he would be on the immediate call list as far as, you know, when Heritage Berry is looking at it, finding a way to make something that represents the community and its history, for sure.
Thank you. I'm supportive of the amendment and would like, and, you know, looking forward to hearing about how that proceeds.
Thanks, Councillor Kungle. On the amendment, Councillor Reitma and Councillor Morales.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm quite sure that Heritage Berry would be very interested in working on this little project. The committee is it has an awful lot of energy and some really great, knowledgeable people on it. And I'm sure that they will be reaching out to Mr. Lloyd and other people that may have roots in that area. And I'm sure that we'll come up with a great solution in due course. So I'm sure that I'm very supportive of the amendment. I think it strikes all the right notes.
Thanks, Councillor Reid. Councillor Morales.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. To Ms. James Reid, if she's on the call, or a appropriate representative, if this amendment were to pass, at the moment, maybe the answer is you don't know yet, do you have an expected idea on what kind of added work it would be, and if there would be any delays in if the motion as a whole actually passes, if there would be any delays to actually inking any sponsorship contract? And then an addendum, a second section to that question is, well, it's hard to know because we don't know what the Heritage Committee is going to recommend, but if they do recommend some sort of acknowledgement, where does the cost of does that come out of the Heritage Committee budget? Does that come out of general facilities? Does that come out of the sponsorship, or how would that work?
Ms. James Reid.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Morales. In terms of the timing of the contract, it's my understanding that the wording of the amendment is to consult with Heritage Barrie. It's not a referral motion. So my understanding is that we would proceed with the sponsorship arrangement with the Peggy Hill team. So it shouldn't delay that. And in terms of the funding, I think that really is going to be a decision that Heritage Barrie Committee will have to make, depending on the scope of the project. But certainly my staff would be excited to help with that work and to do a proper commemoration within the facility.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Ms. James Reid. Based on that answer, Councillor Jim Harris, I think this strikes a good delicate balance between recognizing the sensitivities of an area while still embracing a sponsorship strategy that was very thoroughly developed, and as one of the first big major deals on the table, it still allows it to proceed in an efficient, effective way. So I'll be supportive.
Any other comments on the amendment, members of General Committee? Councillor Harvey, yes, go ahead, of course.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I'd just like to thank the two councillors who reached out today to speak to me about this, because obviously there was some concern being raised by some residents in regards to the building losing its identity without the Holly name on it. I think their amendment is very tasteful and does hit the points that seem to be raised by some of the residents. And we're not just talking about Ward 7 residents or Ward 6 residents who are in this Holly area and the Ardagh area. We've seen it online where we're getting some of the comments from residents that are throughout the city. And to get a bit of a cross section, I did reach out to some of my residents and also to some people that I know in other parts of the city to get their feedback. Because I'll be quite honest with you, I was kind of caught off guard. I didn't anticipate that we were going to receive some of the comments that we've seen online when this motion came forward, to be very honest with you. So I was quoted in the papers as saying this was a great win-win for both sides. I still believe it is. But I don't profess to always be right. So I'm always listening to hear what the residents have to say. And I'm really glad and happy to see what Councillor Harris and Rietma have brought forward. I think too, it's important for our residents to know the history behind why this even is before us today. And this all comes back to a motion from council back in 2015 that was put forward by the previous council, directing staff to look into these types of initiatives and advertising, because we are very limited as to where our revenue streams can come from. And this is just one more way that municipalities can increase revenue. And it's been very successful in other municipalities. I know like Newmarket has at least one arena that they've renamed. And more recently, I've seen that Peterborough just changed the name of another arena also, and these are non-OHL rinks. So obviously you're in a different ball game when you're talking about the OHL rinks. I am supportive of this, and again, to my residents, I'm all ears. I'd love to hear what people have to say before next week, before we go to the final vote. But I think this does resolve many of the issues that have been raised, and I had a great discussion with Mr. Lougheed, and I learned a ton. It's amazing the history that Doug was able to bring forward.
Thanks very much, Councillor Harvey, and I echo the thanks to the councillors for bringing this amendment forward. And Councillor Riepma, I'm sorry, I think you put your card up earlier. Did you want to speak to the amendment?
Mr. Mayor, I think I've said what I need to say.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you for that. I'll certainly support the amendment. I think it is it's a good addition in response to what we have had brought forward by residents, and I appreciate that residents do that, that they bring forward that history that's important to them. So I'll call the question first on the amendment. Those in favor of it, please indicate. Anybody opposed to the amendment? Okay, the amendment carries. On the main motion, now as amended, does anyone wish to comment? Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. More of a comment just on the main motion. I know some residents are a little bit troubled by naming of our facilities, but the city's changing, and this was a direction, I think, I'm not no historian, but I think it was November of 2015. It was a direction of council, and then again in 2017. So we've directed staff to do something which I think they've went out and accomplished in a very fair deal. And I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank the Peggy Hill team for getting into a partnership with our city, who's somebody who's lived in the community for 30 years. And her family's been part of this city for a long time. And, you know, her children grew up there and stuff. So I think it's a great thing. And I sit on the theater task force, so I hope staff and, you know, Councillor Deputy Mayor Ward is on the revitalization. I hope there's some opportunity for sponsorship for the revitalization of the West Side and the theater. So I'm fully supportive of this, and I understand the challenges of the people in Councillor Harvey's neighborhood, because they've become so used to it being called the Holly. But I think this is a great step forward and things that we need to do.
Thanks, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Kungle.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. A comment, and I'm not sure staff will have the answer for this, so I'll leave it as maybe a comment, but the conversation this evening makes me think about or I guess gives me an angle of curiosity about how we're going to operate with the new sponsorship coordinator that we funded in this year's budget, and the linkage to Heritage Barrie. So Allendale and other areas, you know, where we see sponsorship opportunities in the future, will there be an inherently built-in process to link with the Heritage Committee or others if applicable? I think about Councillor Harvey's commentary about, you know, didn't expect these things to be raised. And so I'm wondering if there's an engagement opportunity or consideration that has a natural linkage to the Heritage Committee before decisions are made, maybe on sponsorship, that can tie into kind of a review or consideration process piece. And I'm wondering if Ms. James Reid could speak to that.
Sure, Ms. James Reid.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Kungle. Certainly, as Councillor Harvey and Councillor Thompson indicated, this item and direction has been given to staff for several years, and there's a list of several facilities that have been tasked by staff to find a sponsor. So this had been the first time this has been raised, but I think it's a really good learning opportunity. And I would suggest that perhaps once we complete the work with Heritage Barrie on this facility, that we could do a memo reporting back to council on kind of the broader strategy and what of the facilities listed on the facility sponsorship list we would want to recommend further engagement with Heritage Barrie.
I think that's great. It would be a nice kind of public posting, so residents could be made aware of and know how to get engaged in that early on if they feel aligned or if they think something's missing. Thank you for that, Ms. James Reid.
Thanks, Councillor Kunkel. Did I see another card on the motion as amended? Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Lehman. Actually, one thing that I should have mentioned earlier too, just so people understand how staff got to where they were with all their work, this opportunity was open there for anybody. And there was several others that could have had it that for whatever reason decided they didn't want this opportunity. And it was the Peggy Hill team that stepped up, and I think they've offered a significant amount of money to move forward with this and to show that they've got a team that is very community oriented. A piece of this agreement is specifically for that, where it affords them the opportunity to have some time in the community or in that community center where they can do community events and give back to the community, and also to have their own team related events too. So it just shows that they are a community oriented team. As Councillor Thompson mentioned, Peggy Hill and her family live in the area. They've been there for quite some time, I understand. I personally have never met her. However, I hope that changes. But I would like to thank them for stepping up to the plate and bringing us to where we are today. And one day I do look forward in meeting her in person.
Thanks very much, Councillor Harvey. Councillor Harris.
Sorry, Marlene, I'm very quick. This is a little bit of a go backwards, but I just wanted to say in relation to the heritage concerns, the Peggy Hill team, when I contacted them today, were very interested in supporting the heritage interests of the area and very sensitive to and respectful to the response from the email from Mr. Lougheed. So I just want to make that point.
Thank you. Any other comments on the motion as amended? No, I'll just echo the thanks to the Peggy Hill team. I think there are folks who disagree with the council's decision to offer sponsorship opportunities for our arenas. That disagreement's with us. Please don't dunk on the people who come forward who want to contribute this money to support our community. And I think it's a wonderful thing that Barrie Company, longtime resident in the Barrie Company, has come forward to do this, as have others on other occasions with other facilities. This is, a policy, the naming rights that not everybody does agree with, but brings a great deal of additional funding to our community and to our rec center and to our rec programs. So I echo the thanks, and I think it is important that we are going to recognize the history of the Hawley community in the facility, and that'll be something that many people see because it is one of our busiest facilities in the city. So thanks for that. I will call the question on the motion as amended. Those in favor, please indicate. And opposed? 1. That carries. Okay. The next item that was held, and the only remaining item that was held, is the item on the Housing Affordability Task Force recommendations. The item was put on by Councillor Kunkel on behalf of the task force. And I think I've forgotten who held this. My apologies, I didn't write it down.
Mr. Mayor, I held it.
Councillor Riedma, go ahead.
I held it only for process purposes. I think that I'm very supportive of the recommendations that are before us. I think the staff or the task force has done a terrific job. And one of the beauties of it is that it pulls together a whole lot of the sort of issues and concerns and options that are available. And I think that it is a really nice project, a report that pulls everything together very well and gives us some very good direction as to where to go from here. I may just take this one opportunity to ask a question, and that is with respect to item number 2, where staff is going to come back to us with a memo or a report. And I was wondering if that report could include the co-op program option that Councillor McCann raised, and also the Halton experience that I think it was you, Mr. Mayor, that you mentioned it, because I think both of those are options that are really interesting to have a good hard look at and to see whether they're applicable here. I might also say that we have at least one project, maybe more, that have life leases, and Tollendale is one of those, and that's a very affordable way to provide housing for, in that case, seniors. And that kind of model might also be applicable here as well. So that's a question. I'm not sure who can answer it, but I'd be interested in knowing if we could have a look at those kinds of options as part of number 2 in the recommendation.
We'll go to Ms. Banfield. Oh, we'll just have to bring her into the call. There we go, Ms. Banfield.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Rietma. Absolutely, the Halton project is, and that reference is something that I did make note of this evening, and likely could put something together relatively quickly to add in. The co-op, I'm not as familiar with how I'm going to necessarily resource just kind of that process or that kind of system. It certainly doesn't hurt to put it in the recommendation if council wishes to. And if at the end of the reporting back, we need a little bit more time to explore that, we would just advise council at that time.
Mr. Mayor, just in response to that, I have no intention of delaying anything. I just was hoping that they could do some broader work on it. And if Ms. Banfield can deal with the Halton program, I think that is a really interesting and possible solution. So I'd be satisfied with that.
Thanks so much, Councillor. The items on the floor is printed. I know Councillor Natalie Harris has an amendment, and we'll deal with that as a new paragraph. Maybe after we have a discussion, if it's okay, Councillor Harris, on the 6 paragraphs that are on the floor, if there is any. Are there comments on the motion that's on the floor? Councillor Morales.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. To Ms. Banfield, I'm just going to circle back a bit, I guess, to my question on the scope of committee of adjustments. What would be an appropriate avenue, measure, way to the outcome to be achieved, being that staff essentially review the scope of the committee of adjustment to see if there are opportunities or recommendations to be considered for the next sitting of the committee, so 2022 to 2024, that's right, 2026, in terms of ways to address an increase of scope with compatible requests. Is that something that an amendment would be appropriate now? At first, I thought it wouldn't, because it's different than some of the initial bullet points, but then I look at something like the county one, and that one is a little bit more to ask for information or to get them to look into, instead of something a little more tangible. So I'm wondering, what would your recommendation, if myself or any other member wanted to get staff to look into that?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Morales. I think what's important just to note about in general about the work that the task force had done, it was very much to augment the work staff
Oh, Ms. Banfield, we lost you there. Yeah.
She's already working on
it. That's right. Well, while we wait,
already having our own kind of work plans. So there is, in the broader perhaps. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we lost you there, Ms. Banfield. You may need to start again.
Okay, my apologies. As I said, I think earlier tonight, the internet is tired in my neighborhood. So initially what I was saying was that the work that the task force did actually was to build on the work that staff already did have planned in terms of the affordable housing portfolio. And one of the biggest things that we saw affordable housing projects going back to Committee of Adjustment for were to recognize deficiencies, because a lot of times they were already in built structure. So it was a change of use. And so that's something that council took care of in those housekeeping amendments that you already approved in the fall, where it said if something was coming back for affordable housing, we were saying that they were going to deem to be to comply to all of the zoning. So that was already taken care of. And so council already, in your wisdom, you already looked into taking out some of those Committee of Adjustment applications at this point to do more without kind of, a robust look at it. It's believing for me to get something back to council on February 14th. But as I said, council already makes changes that would make it.
Nope. Lost you again, Ms. Banfield.
Less required. Sorry, I think I was finished. I don't know where you.
Yeah, we got probably 90% of that answer, I think. Go ahead, Councilor Morales.
Okay, yeah. So I guess to refine the scope of my question, what about increasing the scope, not in terms of those existing structures that were taken through and details that were taken through housekeeping that make it easier and more efficient, but adjustments that pertain to 2 units, 3 unit conversions on appropriate areas if the committee deems it that it's appropriate. There has been times where the Committee of Adjustment goes, we don't deem this to be minor. We deem this to be a complete major thing. Please go to the rezoning instead. And they make that determination. But I guess that's kind of where my question was. And my question was, would it be appropriate to do an amendment now or do another process that doesn't hold the other 6 points up and it's on its own? Because again, there's other municipalities, there's opportunities to take committees of adjustments and take projects that instead of adding, and I'm just going to give a range, 80,000 plus of soft costs, it keeps it now a committee of adjustment, which is likely 10 to 20,000. And that just gets projects moving forward a little bit quicker, a little bit more efficiency. And again, within reason, for that gentle density and I can't even call it missing middle. That is rezoning. That's different. For gentle infill, that would be appropriate. So I guess I'm looking. This is more of a procedural question, not so much of an opinion question. Would this be the time, Ms. Banfield? And maybe I guess I can defer to yourself, Mayor Lehman, and Ms. Cook. Is this at the time to put an amendment into here, or not?
Well, sorry, I guess what would your amendment be targeting, Councilor Morales?
Thank you. And let me just it would just be that planning staff or the appropriate staff review the scope of the Committee of Adjustment to look for opportunities to increase that scope as it relates to gentle infill, including but not limited to duplexes and triplexes. So maybe they come back and say, nope, this is too much of a scope. It's better handled through zoning, or they say there are specific areas. So yes, but not everywhere. And then they can empower the committee to make those decisions. Where right now, I believe that the interpretation of the Committee of Adjustment is to the point where, in my one case example, somebody had a property and they chose not to create 4 units, for example. Just because of that limitation of parking. So I'm trying to take a lemon and maybe make it into a lemonade, but I don't know if this is the appropriate timing to do that. So that's why I'm looking for guidance.
Yeah, well, okay. So I guess my guidance, and I'll let Ms. Banfield weigh in on it. I mean, I think the issue of can more matters be heard by the committee rather than be a rezoning is a potential way to lessen the approval burden for some affordable housing projects, but by definition, they got to be minor. So we're a long way from creating hundreds or thousands of units. By definition, this will be the 1s and 2s and 4s here and there. But I think, as Andy was saying during the presentation, there's the issue of, under legislation, we have these 4 tests as to whether a matter is a minor variance and can therefore be heard by the committee. And I guess that's where I'll ask Ms. Banfield to weigh in as to how much flexibility do staff and council have to sort of change that interpretation and potentially broaden it for types of housing that we want to support?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Morales. Obviously, the tests of a minor variance are outlined in the Planning Act. So we have zero flexibility in terms of what those 4 tests are. We do use committee of adjustment as often as we can, not just for affordable housing, but certainly for affordable housing projects, but where it's appropriate. So, I mean, I just think that that's just something that we do anyhow. And I know the example you're talking about, Morales, you know, we said, have that gentleman or that owner call me and we can talk about options, and they chose not to, and that's fine. That's certainly fine. But we do try to, at a staff level, where appropriate, you know, use the committee of adjustment as the great resource and approval authority that they are.
Okay. Thank you for those answers. I will move an amendment now. I'll look to see how other municipalities. I appreciate the clarification. It's there's a document that essentially the Planning Act that guides that. I'm just curious if there's any variance between interpretations on municipalities. Maybe everybody's on the same page, and again, there's no flexibility. Maybe it comes down to interpretation, but I'll do a bit of digging on that and loop back with you, Ms. Manfield. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Morales. Councillor McCann.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Maybe I just ask Councillor Congo if this is her motion, right? So I'm going to clear. It says that on paragraph 5, that you really want staff to focus on the potential supportive housing projects to be subject to an in-camera meeting. And I know it may be the task force that they want to focus on that demographic or that segment of our community, but I'd like to see it be a little bit broader, right? Where we're looking at not just the people that are living on the streets, but everybody in Barrie, and not just narrow it down so much. So I'm wondering if this is the right time to do it, kind of like Councilor Morales was saying. I just don't want to restrict staff. So is that something that we could add into number 5 and take out maybe potential supportive housing and put in just housing affordability?
Go ahead, Councillor Congo.
So I'll look to you, Mayor Lehman, if you want to expand on that. But in response, Councillor McCann, I believe it's so we can have specific conversations about supportive housing projects already underway or forecasted. And it's in camera because it'll be property specific conversations. I don't think it's meant to be limiting, but it's to allow a scoped conversation with Simcoe County as in relationship to those projects. Okay, so then is it your, sorry, if you don't mind, Marilyn, freestyle here, thank you, is that I guess I just don't want the staff report to come back and it be so narrowed on one specific, area of our community. And reading this, kind of the third time, I'm just thinking, does this do that? And if you think my interpretation's wrong, then, I'll accept that and move on. But I'd like, I really want to see, housing affordability, I think is the right word, not just supportive housing, brought back. So maybe I can add some clarity. So I don't believe it's meant to be limiting at all. So the support in the first part of the motion is around all recommendations. So I think that enables us to move forward in a broader scale around all the other levers we've talked about, be it bylaw changes, be it other initiatives and resources. 5 is just a very specific scope to being able to have that in-camera conversation specific to supportive housing. So we can actually dialogue on property areas and opportunities and have some maybe more specific dialogue across members of committee about opportunities there. I think we talk a little bit about one potential opportunity in number 6, but number 5, that in-camera meeting will allow us to actually get a bit more detail from the county. But so I guess this is my interpretation, and tell me if you think that I'm off beat here. Nowhere else in 1 to 6 does it allocate the $5 million from the community fund. Right, so that's specific to this then, and I don't want that if we're going to spend $5 million, I want more information spent on the broader pictures, not just on supportive housing. Right, I want to see what it.
Okay, so yeah, I see what you're aiming at, Councillor McCann. So just by way of interpretation of what the motion is on the floor, yeah. So number 5 specifically makes the allocation of that funding subject to, so it can't happen until council has an in-camera discussion around the specific projects that it might be spent on, because those are individual properties, and that has to be discussed in camera because some of those are property acquisitions. All of the other recommendations obviously are not subject to paragraph 5. So they would all go ahead and would not be affected by paragraph 5. But if your specific concern is that the recommendation of the task force to allocate funding towards supportive housing isn't something that you support, it's totally in order to speak to that now. But I guess the what's unique about that particular recommendation of the task force is it won't happen until we have another discussion around with a whole lot more detail around what it might be spent on. So that was intentional, and I'll take the either the blame or the credit for that. When we were crafting the motion, I thought council can't be asked to spend $5 million without a lot more information than even we can present tonight in a task force recommendation. And because some of it has to be in camera anyway, we made it subject to that second discussion before any of that funding gets spent or even allocated. Sorry, it's not even spent. It's before it's even approved.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the timeline. I guess it's just, I'm trying to set this up for success, not failure. And if it comes back and we've only talked specifically about this one segment in the housing affordability, well, I'm just naturally going to wonder, well, where else could the $5 million be spent in affordable housing? And if the answer is I don't know, then I couldn't say yes to putting $5 million on supportive housing. You understand? It's just getting more information. So, I mean, I'm not sure about how you guys process things and how you make decisions. That's kind of how I would look at this, just on a high level. And if you want to leave it, I'm not going to push it, but I'm still going to ask the question when it comes back. Right. So I guess just, FYI, trying to maybe stop a 14-hour meeting on that night. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Always appreciate that for sure. Councillor Kungle, go ahead.
I guess I'll quickly comment. Yeah, because it is about, we haven't made decisions on allocation. It was really just tying an intention there and to good dialogue. And then we would be opening up, is the money even something we would consider for these things or not? But it's not tied to decision making at that level. So I didn't see it as tying our hands in any way to narrowing the focus on where that $5 million would go, but just to make sure that there's some intention stated there about putting dollars to this, but the dialogue does need to happen. And then I think with a more informed global awareness of general committee and council, we can then talk a bit about next steps.
Okay, I'll let it go and give it some breathing room and let it kind of, come full throttle. I just maybe wanted a little clarification, if you don't mind, Mayor Lehman, where Council Ritma was talking about adding to paragraph 2. Did we actually do that? Is that something that we accomplished? And was the co-op included? And I guess maybe part B to that question is, there's a very specific model that I think is very successful in Scandinavia that I could actually bring forward to Michelle Banfield. And if she thinks that's useful, or if that's another day, another discussion. So do you maybe answer both of those, please? Did we lose Mayor Lehman? Okay.
We might have.
So maybe I'll just ask direct questions then. Wendy, is that Ms. Cook? Is that something?
We could just get Councillor or Deputy Mayor Ward to take over chairing the meeting until Mayor Lehman comes back. That would be great.
Okay. Sure. So
2 questions, Deputy Mayor. 2 questions, Deputy Mayor. One was about the co-op, and the second one was, does Michelle want me to provide any information that I think is a successful model, or is that something that she wants to do on her own?
And sorry, folks, I'm really glad I paid for the super high quality internet service. It's the 3rd time tonight. I'm sorry, Councillor McCann. Again, I came in on the tail end of a Mike McCann question. So was that to Ms. Banfield? Is that what I heard?
Yes.
Yes, Ms. Banfield, go ahead. Sorry, folks.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor McCann, absolutely, if you have information that you and I can connect on offline, that would be fantastic.
Okay. All right, great, thank you. And maybe just one last question. When this report comes, if I can talk to Michelle Banfield directly, please. Michelle, when you and your team bring back this report, Do I need to put something in writing to get back the update on the Redwood, $3 million fund that we gave them back in June? I mean, I haven't really inquired. I don't know where we're at with that, and it's okay to where they are now, but I'd like to know more when this report comes back, just because it's obviously dollars spent in a very similar field. Do you need direction from me, or is that something that you can report back on with this report, or at least have that information ready, I guess?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor McCann, I would actually defer to the clerk if she would need, if I need direction to respond to that, or if I can.
Pretty sure there was direction in the motion previously, but go ahead, Madam Clerk.
There was, through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor McCann, there was previous direction for a report back on the status of the Redwood properties. It has not come forward to General Committee yet. So there is currently direction out there for a report back.
Yeah, but I'm guessing this is coming back with a sense of urgency, I'm guessing, right? This is not going to come back in September. This is going to come back. And so whenever it comes back, whether it's January or March or April, if I could get that information back just so we can compare apples and apples.
Yeah, and I think your point, Councillor McCann, is if we're going to be talking about other investments, it would be good to know about the status of that one. So, Madam Clerk, maybe you could report back to Council before next Monday, just on the timing for the report on that previous commitment, because I do tend to agree that all of these things should be considered at the same time. And even if the staff report's not coming back, if we can get an update by memo, Ms. Cook?
I certainly can get some kind of an update before Council next week.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor McCann. Other comments on the motion that's on the floor, the 6 paragraphs that are on the floor? Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Mayor Lehman. I didn't say anything during the presentation. I just had one question, and it was actually in your final report to council, the 32-page report. Page 8, there was a comment about Lucy's Place and the conversions of the motel system. And, the goal would be to accomplish 200 new units. Would that include the former OPP station, or 200 on top of that?
No, 200 is the number. It's a rough number target for supportive housing units. So the OPP station is actually going to be Simcoe County community housing. That's county social housing. This is basically, we need another 175 units, actually, sorry, 200 units, similar to Lucy's Place, because we weren't counting the Lucy's Place units. So, and that is to get close to the number of that was in the homeless enumeration done last year. It actually doesn't quite get us there, but you're never going to have a perfect match, and not every person experiencing homelessness is appropriate or wants to go into supportive housing, and there are others who aren't necessarily living on the street who would benefit from supportive housing. But that's where the number came from, Councillor Thompson. And so that's why a larger scale supportive housing project is such a goal, because 200 units is a lot, but it is the best shot we've got to end chronic homelessness.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you. And sorry for the confusion on the former OPP site. More of just a comment on the whole report. To all the members who participated in volunteering and giving up time as the other task force, I really do appreciate, community members trying to solve problems that are very challenging to our community. And I spoke to a very wise person today, and, we talked about this report, and it was basically, if you don't get in the driver's seat to drive the bus, it never leaves the station. So I think this is a start. So I appreciate it. And yeah, there's some questions, but I think it's a good start. So thank you. I will support it.
Thanks, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Kungl.
I should speak to this, the mover of the motion, but again, echoing some of the compliments to the task force, and I believe your comments at the beginning of the presentation, Mayor Lehman. Well, one, thank you for your leadership as chair to this, because the knowledge that you bring as well as those around a table, I think resulted in really great dialogue and shared learning, but also in recognition of those members. And I think, as we've seen through Ray and Mr. Thompson and Andy, we see them sometimes in different roles that they play within the city, be it a planner, be it on committee of adjustment. But the skill set that this task force represented was pretty amazing. And I think, the recording of the presentation and the dialogue that I think was over an hour could be a really great tool for other municipalities and task groups. I think the City of Barrie and the work of the task group, I've been seeing from other municipality colleagues outside of Barrie an interest in what we've been doing around affordable housing, what our staff has been doing around some of the changes to the bylaws. And so I do want to say, I feel good, and I want to thank members of General Committee, because I think we have shown political will to be interested in this and to designate this as a priority and to strike that task force. So regardless of where we land in the coming moments and in the coming week, I think the report is a really great resource that brings forward some great ideas and conversations. And I'm hoping residents and different groups see this and start to engage with the city on opportunities to have some dialogue.
Thanks, Councillor Kungle. I'll save my comments because I know Councillor Natalie Harris has an important amendment that she wants to bring forward as well, just on emergency and shelter housing. So maybe we'll do that now. Councillor Harris, if you want to move your amendment.
Sure. Thank you, Mary Lehman. So the amendment is that a one-time grant of $20,000 funded from the reinvestment reserve be provided to the John Howard Society of Simcoe Muskoka to fund an additional overnight warming capacity in the city of Barrie, and that the County of Simcoe be requested to match this funding.
Okay, so we have an amendment from Councillor Natalie Harris to provide a one-time $20,000 grant to JHS, John Howard Society, for additional overnight warming capacity. Do you want to speak to that, Councillor Harris?
Yes, and I won't take too long. I know people are pretty aware of what's going on in our downtown right now with respect to our unhoused that are looking for a warm place to go. So I did make a couple little notes that I'm just going to read because it will make it faster, actually. So the pandemic has changed the way we need to help our unhoused. And a perfect example was the report that we just heard, that we're looking at commercial parking lots and thinking, how can we change this and make this into something different? So we really must pivot, and we have to adapt. And when we have identified gaps in our services, which I think this has happened this year for sure, we need to pivot and change the way we provide shelter, housing, and warmth. And I've separated the word warmth because it is separate. So shelters for people, this is an important definition for people that are watching to understand. So our amazing shelter systems are funded through the County of Simcoe, and they provide many things. So they provide beds and peer support, food, harm reduction information, a connection to resources, so many things. And we're very grateful for that. But there are times when individuals can't, for one reason, access the shelter system. And right now that is true, especially with COVID, with restrictions with the health unit, et cetera. And because our things such as coffee shops are closed. So somebody who may not want to go to the shelter system because there's an intake, there's a process that might have to be involved, and they just really wanted to get out of the cold, could go into our Tim Hortons or whatever and try to get warm. Last year, that was our bus terminal. And this year we are opening the bus terminal with extreme temperatures if we can staff it. But we need something that is for sure. We need something now in our city that going forward, and I know that this is a temporary funding and we can have lots more discussion about that later, but we've identified a gap. There's people that are out on the street that simply have no place, especially at nighttime, to be warm. And the John Howard Society has been working since the end of November, and they have found 40 to 50 volunteers. Councilor Morales is amazing. He reached out to all of the downtown businesses through the BIA and said we are in search of security employees to be able to provide discrete security at this location. And Ty Jones came back and said yes right away. So they're pretty much ready to operate this. But we need to be very, very clear. It's literally a place to be warm. So they open the door and they go inside and they sit down. Maybe there's a coffee, maybe there's not, but it's a warm place with a staff member. So this funding would cover the staffing of one John Howard or a position to be able to be there every single night until March, and also to provide salaries or wages for the security employees who right now don't have jobs. So that's a really great opportunity for them. So that is kind of what we have on the floor right now. And some people, you know, there are many reasons why a person might not even want to go to a shelter, but the shelter systems are amazing. But sometimes I think what we're seeing right now with the attention in the media is that's not necessarily even what someone on our streets wants. They just sometimes just want to go somewhere to get warm for a little while. And maybe they have plans for the rest of their night to do something or whatever. So we have to look at that. That's the reality right now, that there's nowhere to really go at nighttime. So that's that. Thank you.
Okay, on the amendment, Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. To the mover of the motion, if the 20,000 and then the ask from the county, is the 40,000 the required amount to accomplish? And in the amendment, I didn't see a breakdown of the actual money. So 2 questions. Will there be a breakdown of the money by next week? And second, is there actually a facility that we're speaking of?
Yeah, that's both really great questions. So we can absolutely get that breakdown for sure. The 40,000, it was increased into the 40,000 range to include the salary for the security employees. So, but we can get the hard facts for you, absolutely. And there are 2 locations right now. One is very confidential, but there is, and this is just literally from yesterday and today, and one other location, which was the Cornerstone to Recovery location that will be the Women's Treatment Center. They have a house on the property, and the John Howard Society is making the contacts necessary to do the fire code inspections, and it's very small, so it wouldn't be able to facilitate probably more than 4 to 6 people, but it's something. So that is, we looked at the house today, myself, Susanna from the John Howard. I always do that. I don't know why I do that. The hotels, everybody's hotels, shelters, so, and it seems like it will work, hopefully, in the one portion of the building. So fingers crossed.
Maybe a question through you, Mayor Lehman, to the mover. If we approve this tonight, we ratify it next week, it goes to the county council, they decide whether to match. We're talking 3 to 4 weeks. We're into almost February. Is there, like, I'm actually floored. I've had a few conversations, and I don't even understand how we're at this stage with the amount of money spent on these services. Like, it's the guy who tells you he hasn't bought nothing and it's Christmas Eve. Winter was coming this year, 100%. Like, this isn't a new season. And to bring it to council, it just, and I understand that it was downloaded and warming centers aren't part of the human services, but the 20,000 you're asking for, and then 20 from the county, well, the residents of Barrie already give the 25% of that 20,000. So it's like, we always seem to be on our lap. And look, I am 100% supportive of this. I know that the county and Mr. Bishop and Ms. Peddle have been working, and I know they were dealing with fire, and it's my understanding that by Wednesday, 80 Mulcaster will be opened. So it's moving quick. It seems to be we're in the second week of January, and just one question: if we provide a grant, and maybe this isn't for the mover, Councillor Harris, maybe this would be more for Ms. Peters. Does, heaven forbid anything happened does this make the city liable in any way, shape, or form by allocating funds to it?
So if we can get Ms. Peters into the call, I guess the question is does the city somehow become liable if we are funding a service, or Mr. Mills, if we are funding a service and the service provider is targeted with a legal action, is the city also at legal risk?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Thompson. Yeah, I do think we would have some liability exposure anytime we're participating in an arrangement with another party. So generally, we try to minimize that liability by entering into an agreement whereby another party takes on it.
Perfect. Just a follow up. If that was the case, then if the money was conditional of the match by the county and us giving a grant to the county and then the entire sum coming from the county, would that remove our liability?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Thompson, it may minimize our liability, but I don't think it would remove it. No.
Can I ask a follow-up, Rob? Sorry, Councillor Thompson, I'm just going to jump in because this is a very interesting point. So the County of Simcoe funds a huge number of different organizations within its human services mandate, several dozen. Technically, the city contributes to a lot of those. So I guess my question is, in practice though, Mr. Mills, are you aware of a legal action against the city that's resulted from that? Are we named in any actions as a consequence of our funding of a county service which is then funded to a service provider?
Mayor Lehman, not off the top of my head. No, I'm not aware of an existing action.
Yeah, I'm not sure I've seen one. But I mean, unfortunately, lawyers who launch lawsuits are sometimes creative in who they include in suits. I don't mean to make light of it, but I'm certainly aware that often anybody that is believed to be involved in any capacity can be at some risk. I'm just saying, I guess, Councillor Thompson, for what it's worth, I'm not aware of the city being named in a legal action because we were one of the funders of a county service, for what it's worth. So you may be onto something there as opposed to a direct grant, but you know, the complexity of that could I guess add some time. Anyway, back to you, Councillor Thompson, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. And I appreciate that. Yeah, I would think that it would eliminate the liability by going through, because we fund every service the county offers. So we would be named in everything. And I was just looking, look, I'll be honest, I'm disappointed we're at this point. And I know the hard work. I was on the phone with somebody who was down there on the weekend with the removal of the temporary, which, you know, for all intents and purposes was, you know, something that had to be done. And it's sad that it had to come to that. But I just, like I said, I'm supportive of it, but I would just like to see it flow through the county and be conditional of that, and with them having a little bit of oversight to remove the liability of the city.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Thompson. On the amendment, Councillor Jim Harris.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Lehman. Maybe just, you know, obviously this is an important issue, and I'm sure all of us have heard from residents about the concerns about our folks who are experiencing homelessness and the weather that we're experiencing as well. And I just wondered, to maybe build some confidence in our community. Obviously, as Councillor Thompson mentioned, it's not the first cold winter in Barrie, and we've had service providers for many years providing services to those citizens. And maybe, I don't, it's Ms. McAlpine who is our connection to the Last Stand Homelessness. If that's correct, maybe a question, Mayor Lehman, through you to the appropriate staff, if it's Ms. McAlpine, just to give us some insight into what's been the conversations at SCADA related to shelters, warming centers, and out of the cold efforts this winter. And we've got to this place where we are recognizing that there's individuals looking to have something to augment what's currently offered. But I wonder if you can give us a sense, just even for our community sense and confidence, that there is a great deal of efforts that are being put forward. And even in tonight, knowing that the warming center is operational at the bus terminal. So I just want to know if you could give us a bit of a briefing on what's being offered with relation to this issue. Thank you.
Ms. McAlpine.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Through Mayor Lehman to you. The city is not directly a member of SCADA. The county is, as the service provider. In terms of city staff, there may be members of council who attend their meetings, but city staff are not directly involved in it. I can advise that, yes, as you've mentioned, the transit terminal has been made available and is made available under our emergency plan when an extreme cold alert is announced for the area by Environment Canada. And the Environment Canada definition is when the temperature or wind chill is expected to reach -30 degrees for at least 2 hours. There are other, as Councillor Natalie Harris indicated, there are various options that are available in different services. There's the traditional sheltering system, there are respite beds, which are sleeping beds, and then there are warming centers, which are warming only and not necessarily sleeping spaces. Traditionally, those warming spaces have been provided by community organizations. What has happened with the pandemic is the volume of people who are seeking those spaces has increased, and there are greater challenges in providing those spaces given health restrictions and, frankly, staffing in a COVID environment. So those are all factors that are there, and it looks like Councillor Natalie Harris wanted to say something as well.
Yes, sorry, thank you.
Yes, so do I. Go ahead, Councillor Natalie Harris.
No, thank you. That was a really great answer. Thank you, Ms. McAlpine. I'll also highlight a little bit of information for maybe people that are watching with respect to the churches. So there are 2 churches that have offered to provide some days of the week, and there is the delay for that is because of linked to COVID. They needed special insurance permission, and they also needed permission from the diocese. So this is, I agree. Why are we here right now? Why is this happening so late? Learning that the bus terminal wasn't going to be an every night warming center like it was last year, at first wasn't as much, even though we started talking about it as soon as I heard it end of November, but we could still have coffee shops. We still had places where people would go. So this is really kind of turned on a dime where that just doesn't happen anymore. So those people were sheltering in that gazebo because they're literally at nighttime, it wasn't even open. So they had nowhere to go if it wasn't -30, but at least after the night they could go there and warm up to the best of their ability. But that's kind of the conversations behind the scenes have been happening since late November. And I agree, like, how has this gotten to this position? When I reached out to Greg Bishop again, I think it was late November, early December, and brought this to his attention. He just said, like, let's try to get the services that do receive funding from the county to collaborate with services that don't, and see if we can, for lack of better words, stretch the dollars a little bit more. But how? The dollars are stretched. The shelters and all of the services that are funded by the County of Simcoe are highly run as well by volunteers. How many more times are we going to ask for volunteers to give up their time? And this would be at night. And there's already 40 to 50 people that are on the list ready to volunteer. But I think we need to see that the conversation needs to continue. And I'm happy that Councillor Kungle put her thing on the agenda tonight to have that conversation with the county, because times are changing. We can't look at this the same way. This has really been brought to our attention this year, but I can promise you it is not for lack of effort that we're here tonight. But and we also had one location come forward about a month ago with a potential warming center, and it didn't pass the fire code. So that's where we're at.
Councillor Jim Maris.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, appreciate all the challenge that are aligned with this. To your point, I agree. The resources are limited and services are often, and I remember when Out of the Cold was born in Barrie, it was run by volunteers. The churches, several churches stepped up, and it became an incredibly successful operation and helped a lot of people. So yeah, the power of volunteering in our faith community are clearly, and it's good to hear they're already stepping up again. So, but what I wondered about was, and I know we had a memo from staff just around 88 Mulcaster opening, or is open, I think is what I read, is open from 8 to 3 p.m. for warming. In the sense of trying to consolidate and coordinate and cooperate to meet this need. And I know that you mentioned there was 2 other sites. Just curious why the extension. They're saying they're open from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m., guessing resources, but they may have volunteers able to open overnight if needed. Is that that's not part of the options? And if you could explain maybe why we're not pursuing a collaboration and a consistent site, and if you could give me any insight, that would be helpful. Thank you. Maybe
great question. Oh, sorry. Do you want me to answer, Mayor Lehman? So yeah, great question. It's again a bit complicated, but the services, so John Howard Society and the Gilbert Center did reach out to Busby, and the reply that they got in over time was they were open to collaboration, but it would be that those services would come and help them there. And to be honest, I'm going to be straight up right here. And this is no offense to Busby in any way, shape, or form. There are individuals on our street that don't want to go somewhere that is related to the shelter system. So 88 Mulcaster is that, and they will perceive it as that. So a different building with just an open door where they can go in and get warm, especially at night. So this would cover the night shift. This would cover what Busby is maybe struggling to be able to staff because their dollars are stretched so thin. So this is a gap that is the minimum, I think, that we can do for these individuals at this time, because there's nowhere else to go. And how much, like, the collaboration is wonderful. There were stipulations involved in the collaboration effort. And it wasn't easy. It was quite complex, which is understandable. The best way forward is to just allow the services that the John Howard Society teamed up with the Gilbert Center has already collaborated and gotten those resources available for this warming center, wherever it will be. And then they still support each other by providing, if you would like to go to the shelter, okay, we'll give you that information. Again, there isn't any kind of coaching or anything that happens in a warming center, but there of course is going to be conversations that happen that share the information that there are other services available. And the other thing I wanted to say was a lot of, again, this is very much COVID related, and it's sad, but we're unfortunately going to see more unhoused people on our streets than less in the near future, with businesses closing, with the cost of rent, with all the things. We're going to start to see familiar faces on the street. And you know, we can't wait anymore for collaboration, etc. And it can be anybody. And when a person is newly unhoused, like imagine yourself in those shoes. You're newly unhoused. The first thing you're not looking for necessarily is even how to navigate the shelter system. It might be that you need somewhere warm to go tonight. And then that's the first step, maybe to go to a respite bed. And then that's the next step to maybe go to wherever our other services are as well. A lot of our unhoused people are very young. They're teenagers. And Youth Haven does amazing work, but they're usually always full. they are so stretched for dollars as well. And those individuals that are younger are kind of fearful to going to the shelter as well. It's unfortunately, even though how welcoming we can make the shelter service and how supportive and caring in the original moments of being unhoused, that isn't the first place that you go to. People look for a couch to sleep on, a car to sleep in. Maybe they're sleeping in their car for some time. If they can get out of their car and go into the warming center just to warm up for a little bit, that is kind of where we're at with people that are newly unhoused. So that's kind of a new gap where COVID has really exposed.
Okay, thank you. And maybe just, I thank you for the answer and the extension. You know, certainly, obviously, the sector and our shelter staff have been working incredibly hard and overwhelmed. And we know obviously absenteeism is a concern across all service sectors. So certainly finding a way to collaborate, even if it is not in the same site, but the hours of operation are staggered such that one site, is that what I'm hearing, won't bear the full 24 hours, that there'll be the time that the 88 Mulcaster operates, this shelter or warming center, would be operational at a different time to allow that connection and coordination in that form?
Yeah, sorry, can I just jump in, Councillor Harris, because I haven't yet at this point, and obviously spent a lot of time on this over the last 3 or 4 days. And I know you've been literally on Dunlop and elsewhere on this issue too. I just want to maybe we can simplify it though. I think Councillor Harris is asking General Committee to commit $20,000 to create additional warming capacity overnight in the downtown at a time when that capacity has to be provided differently because of the severity of the Omicron variant. It's very dangerous for the homeless population to be gathered at all because so many have underlying health conditions. So it's got to be done safely. It's got to be distanced. You literally need more floor area to do that than normal. The respite beds are a good solution, and they have not been full, and they have been able to provide people with overnight warming, which is in an individual bed and safe, therefore. But that's up at the travel lodge, at the hotel. So I think if we can simplify this discussion maybe a little bit, I think what Councillor Harris is bringing forward is, we know that with the closure of coffee shops and other potential places to stay warm overnight, with the fact that there are some individuals who won't go into the shelter system or can't go into the shelter system, there is a need for the warming capacity. And notwithstanding, what does exist, I think has kept people from being out in the cold overnight. There are still some gaps in terms of 24/7 throughout the winter. And in terms of a certain number of people, I think it's a fairly small number, but a certain number of people who can't access the other supports. So I would suggest to you it's a modest amount of money in an extraordinary circumstance. I think Councillor Thompson and others are quite right to say, hang on a minute though, isn't this pointing out some problems with our system? Yeah, COVID has pointed out a whole bunch of frailties in our social service net, in our regulatory net, in society in general, I think. And I think this is the latest example. And I do think it's a bit urgent. So I think, Rob, you've got a very good point. We don't want to do something that, it's not going to work for another 3 or 4 weeks, especially when the need is now. So I guess I would urge General Committee to keep it simple and provide the funding. I understand I'd never take any amount of grant money lightly, but I would urge you that the demand is now and to me fairly obvious, and it is related to the truly once in a this is the first time this has ever happened in terms of the need to distance and completely change the way the service delivery is there. Hopefully won't be the need in the future, but we'll also have hopefully better and additional capacity in the future and more time to plan it. So Councillor Jim Harris, technically you still have the floor. And then I see Councillor Thompson's.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Lehman, and thank you to both you and Councillor Natalie Harris and Mr. Calpine for answering my questions, and definitely interested and pleased that there's a consolidated, coordinated effort to do better on this item. So thank you for that.
Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Mayor Lehman. I only speak for myself, and I'm very supportive of this. And I was wondering if, as a friendly, that we can maybe just put it that it's through the county, and then that way it removes the liability, and they're the providers of the service, that we offer the 20,000 grant with the county match being provided by insight from the or oversight, sorry, from the county to provide the funding.
So we could add the words to the John Howard Society. It could read through the county of Simcoe. Would that accomplish what you're seeking, Councillor Thompson? Councillor Natalie Harris?
Yeah, that's great. I really don't care how it gets to them. So that's great. If it makes it less liabilities for the city, I'm really glad you brought that up. I have no problem with that.
Okay, Councillor Thompson? You good? Okay, Councillor Kunkel? And then Councillor Harvey.
Thank you through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Harris. Just another nuance in how that's read. I like the amendment proposed, or the friendly, through the county, because of their just expertise with service agreements and other pieces that I think will support the movement of those dollars to the targeted area. I didn't know if we needed any further clarity, either in conversation or in the motion, about, regardless of if the county matches the dollars, a commitment regardless from the city for the 20,000. So I guess I'll indicate I'm interested if we can flow it through the county, that Barry's commitment to 20,000 is not dependent on county council.
Councillor Natalie Harris?
Yeah. Oh, am I me? Okay, good. Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. I definitely, the intention of the amendment is not to have it dependent upon the approval of the county agreeing to match us. However, my question maybe is to you, Mayor Lehman, or the clerk, is there still a way of wording it that our 20,000 would still go through the county? If they're the experts in being able to do that, then that would be great wording as well. My fingers crossed the county matches. And that would be wonderful, but I for sure want to make sure we at least get the $20,000 to the John Howard Society.
And I'm sorry, I don't have the wording of the amendment in front of me. Does it say conditional, Madam Clerk?
No, Mayor Lehman, we left that out purposely because of the conversation
There you go.
that we had earlier today.
Okay.
That's great. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page when it talked about requesting a matching. If that didn't come through, if it kind of delayed the conversation and made it come back to council in any way for clarity. Yes, other than that, I mean, this is something we can do. This is something we know there's a need. Mayor Lehman, you made some great summary points around the current status. I'm also excited about, I believe, another amendment that will be coming to the floor, where we can see some additional capacity, which is within our role and scope to kind of support access to warming areas. So thank you for bringing it forward. I'm sure the conversation's not done around the how we got here and what's happening, but I'm really hoping it doesn't belabor us from actually seeing a step forward that we can take to put some funding to this immediately.
Thanks, Councillor Kungl. Councillor Harvey, you're next.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Actually, Councillor Kungl had the same concern I had. Was my question was going to be about what do we do if the county doesn't match. But I think it's important to note too, I was actually kind of astounded and taken back a bit when Councillor Harris mentioned the fact that these discussions have occurred with the county since November. And now we're almost the middle of January and it's like -10 outside. So it's ridiculous to think that we're where we are today. So I would hope the county's watching this and they act fast, because this is kind of a ridiculous situation that we find ourselves in my opinion.
Okay, any further comments on the amendment? Okay, then I will call the question. Those in favor of the amendment? Thank you very much, members of General Committee. That's unanimous. Thank you, Councillor Natalie Harris, for continuing to work on this. We talked an awful lot over the last 48 hours,
Yeah,
including when you were down there at Dunlop and Mulcaster, and I appreciate your relentlessness on this since late November.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Councillor Aylwin, I see you. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I do have an amendment that's been circulated to members of council as paragraph 8. So I'll move that now. And it's to add a paragraph that the city open a warming only facility when an extreme cold weather alert is issued by Environment Canada, where the temperature or wind chill is expected to reach -20 degrees Celsius for at least 2 hours. And I can speak to that.
Sure. So it is an amendment from Councillor Aylwin, and it would so currently our criteria is only when there's an extreme cold weather alert from Environment Canada, and this would change that criteria to -20, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, go ahead.
So first, I wanted to echo the thanks to Councillor Harris for all the work she's put in on this important issue. You're right, Mayor Lehman. She's relentless, and it's inspiring to see. It's awesome, actually. And I think thanks is also owed to the John Howard Society, Busby Center, Gilbert Center, all the social service and housing providers who have been talking about this issue and working to find solutions. Christine Naylor from Ryan's Hope has been pushing very hard as well. Blueberry Moon, a local business downtown, has been spreading the word and helping out as much as they can. So I just wanted to make sure they all know that they're appreciated for the work that they're doing. So this amendment is to recognize that the city's current policy is when there's an extreme weather warning in place, which means -30 degrees Celsius, that's when our emergency plan kicks into gear and we create that warming only facility. The issue with that is that -30 is really, really, really cold, and there's a need when it's a bit warmer than that at -20 degrees. Health Canada says that -27 degrees Celsius is the temperature where you really start to have to worry about windburn and frostbite. So I think if we're going to follow the science on that, then -20 makes sense. And that will be fulfilling our obligation to our residents that they can be safe in extreme cold temperatures. So I'm hoping that we can support that and fill another one of those gaps in the system.
Okay, that's the amendment on the floor. Councillor Thompson.
Thanks. Through you, Mayor Lehman, to the mover of the motion. Is there any other municipality that's lowered the Environment Canada?
Yes, I believe the City of London uses -20 as their threshold as well.
And this would be just to open up a city facility in an emergency?
Correct. So like what's happening tonight, the transit terminal is open as a warming center tonight only because Environment Canada issued an extreme weather alert. And so it would be that same operation, but for when it's -20 instead of just -30.
So with Councillor Natalie Harris's motion and the money, have we not kind of solved that problem of there will be a 24-hour warming center opened all the time downtown? So the terminal's used in an emergency situation right now because we don't have one, but I thought we just, kind of filled that gap. So, and to be honest, we've had some challenges in the terminal. So I think by removing it from the terminal for our workforce and the challenges that we have had, that maybe it's, like I said, we've supported it and we've given grant funding. So I think if we didn't give the grant funding, then I might have been more in line to support it. But I think with the original motion that we've kind of filled the gap. I'm not going to say we've solved the problem, but
yeah, I think that's a really important point, and I thank you for raising that. I think the difference here is that this is a policy change looking at years in the future as well. So that's one piece. The funding for John Howard is just looking at this year. And secondly, I would argue that because of the reasons we've discussed tonight around needing more space to facilitate physical distancing, this is certainly something that can be used to help with those issues. And this is something that we provide as an emergency service. This is something we've provided for a number of years. So I think just making sure that service we provide is evidence-based and actually is there when there's a significant safety risk to people being outside is key. And I think, the difference between last year and this year with the transit terminal specifically, we're back to using it just as an emergency warming facility and not as a 24/7 all winter long facility. That's where we really saw the issues start to arise, was when it was that 24-hour facility. And that's not what this amendment is proposing. It's to keep it as that emergency triggered by the negative 20 degrees Celsius in the forecast. And I think that'll help with some of the concerns from the facility staff and the transit staff at the terminal.
I have nothing further.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Kungle.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I'm going to put Ms. McAlpine on the spot. I was able to speak with Ms. McAlpine about this because I was aware of the amendment coming. I'm supportive of the change, but did have questions around impact and the balance between maybe a bit more of a, and I don't want to criticize where we were currently, but humanitarian aspect or compassionate approach when we know the impact of cold weather on individuals, and balancing that with what does it mean to operate perhaps more frequently, and what kind of potential is there for us to be experiencing the same issues that we talked about through the ongoing operation of the bus terminal. So I'm comfortable actually with this and at the minus 20 degrees, but I wanted to see if Ms. McAlpine wanted to speak to any of the components around, this will come at a budget cost, I'm sure, and we'll probably need to be looking at that in the future. But around my understanding, those that would access Busby or a shelter system would probably be the same individuals that would access the bus terminal. And this stopgap, I guess I would say, or this additional capacity through the $20,000, in my view, is really where we're seeing individuals who still might not be looking at being able to access the terminal. So I'm not sure, Ms. McAlpine, if you wanted to add anything to the question about is it redundant or not, or does the motion of 20,000 kind of fit the need that the minus 20 changes?
Ms. McAlpine.
Through Mayor Lehman to you, Councillor Kungle. I believe the intent is to address different individuals who may have differing needs, and the opportunity for the transit terminal during an emergency doesn't necessarily address the needs of some individuals who would be accessing the warming center that the John Howard Society and the Gilbert Center are looking to open. And I believe Councillor Elwin also introduced this because the timing for the John Howard Society and the Gilbert Center isn't specifically known. And while they're working very diligently to find a solution, there is more cold weather in the interim. Minus 30 was used because that is the Environment Canada standard, and their warnings are tailored to what's considered to be a weather extreme for a particular area. It minus 20 may be more suitable for people. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. I have no further questions or comments. I'm supportive of the amendment.
Okay, on the amendment, Councillor Natalie Harris.
Thank you. Yeah, everything just got checked off. Exactly. So we don't have a confirmed date yet. I am very supportive of this amendment because we can still use the bus terminal if necessary tomorrow if we get to that number. So again, I like the fact that we still have some planning in the future. We need to talk about all of this again. We need to sit down and figure out how to do this better next year. But I think that's also a great addition to this.
Okay, thank you. On the amendment, any further comments? Okay, I'll call the question. Those in favor of the amendment, please indicate. Opposed? 1. Okay, that carries. Are there, okay, so that's 2 amendments to deal with the emergency warming situation. Those are both 2 new paragraphs. The first 6 were the ones dealing with the task force. So we now have the motion as amended with 8 paragraphs. Any further comments? Okay, I'll just wrap up, and I'm not going to give a big long speech, but I do again want to thank the task force members. I also want to thank General Committee for seeing the task force's work, I think for what it is, which is pretty bold stuff. I mean, planning policy may not immediately get a pile of attention because it's policy, it's not projects. It's not till people see buildings coming out of the ground or being proposed next door to them or those sorts of things that it gets a lot of attention. But these are steps that, in some cases, there are steps here that other cities have taken, but for us, they are quite new and quite different. And there are some things here that are quite unique. So I really do appreciate the work that was done by so many members of the task force. And it is the beginning, but you make a small change in direction, and over time, the distance from your original course becomes enormous. And that I think is what an action plan like this can do. So with that, I will call the question on the motion as amended. Those in favor, please indicate. Any opposed? None. That passes unanimously.
Separate report.
Separate report's been requested. Madam Clerk. Okay, that completes the items that were held tonight. Bear with me just a moment. I don't believe there is any other business except for inquiries and announcements. Deputy Mayor Ward, do you have any inquiries of staff?
No inquiries.
Members of General Committee, any inquiries of staff? Seeing none. Announcements. Deputy Mayor Ward, do you have any announcements?
I do. I have about two meetings coming up this week. One is tomorrow night, there's a neighborhood meeting. This is Tuesday at 7 o'clock. There's a neighborhood meeting. This is to discuss a proposal by the Bayfield Mall to turn the former theater area into self-storage. I find it strange to have a neighborhood meeting for this, but apparently they do. So there's a chance for the public to comment on what they think about the plan to convert part of the Bayfield Mall into a self-storage area. That's at 7 o'clock. Information about that can be found online, or you can get in touch with me. I can tell you how to attend the meeting. These are virtual meetings. Wednesday night, of course, is our town hall meeting with Ward 3 Councillor Kungle, Ward 5 Councillor Thompson, myself, and yourself, Mayor Lehman. It begins at 7 o'clock, and we'll take questions from the public. And once again, if you want to know how to join in the meeting, either contact one of us or go to the city's website. You get all the information you need. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Ward. Any other announcements, members of General Committee? Okay, seeing none. Deputy Mayor Ward, you saved me one. Well, I'll give you the ones that I've got listed here. Okay, first of all, the city is accepting applications for its Arts and Culture Investment Program, formerly named the Cultural Grants Program. All arts and culture organizations are encouraged to apply. The deadline for applications is Monday, January 31st by 4:30 p.m. To view the program guidelines, submit your application. You can visit barrie.ca/culture grants. Been asked to give a reminder to everyone out there that as winter moves on and curbside collection becomes a little more difficult, please do try and place your bins out of the path of snow removal equipment. Otherwise, Rick Mercer will drive by in a snowplow and bury them. It also can present a challenge for our collectors if they're up on top of the banks, particularly if they're heavy. So please do follow that direction there, tuck it into your driveway, not on the snowbank. Thank you very much. Overnight on-street parking restrictions are in effect, of course, now until March 31st, 2022. The I Love Barrie contest is now open for entries, and students from kindergarten to grade 12 are welcome to express what's special about the city by sharing artwork, a short story, or a photo. Contest entries can be submitted online at barrie.ca/mybarrie, must be received by 4 p.m. Friday, January 28th. Winners will be announced on Valentine's Day, February 14th. And yes, the transit terminal will be open tonight as a warming center for the duration of the extreme cold warning. And now, given the criteria have changed, it could be a little longer than that, depending on the temperature. Safety protocols and capacity restrictions will be followed to ensure COVID safety. And you do need a mask to be brought in, and they have some on site there to help folks who may need to come in and use the space. Last, certainly not least, let me pull up my notes here. We are welcoming a new staff member to the meeting tonight and to the city, and she is on this call tonight. Megan Williams is our new deputy clerk. She comes to us from the city of Aurelia, where she was the deputy city clerk. Megan started with City of Aurelia in 2010, has experience working in different areas, including the clerk's office, planning and development, and she worked in the CAO's office. Megan holds a Master of Arts in Political Science from the University of Waterloo, so she knows exactly what we're up to. A Bachelor of Arts with honors in Criminal Justice and Public Policy from the University of Guelph, and a certificate in Parliamentary Meeting Protocol, which, let me tell you, Parliamentary Meeting Protocol is a barn burner if you want to be kept up at night reading something exciting. Anyway, she got that through the Association of Municipal Clerks Treasurers of Ontario, AMCTO. Megan, welcome to your first General Committee meeting, and welcome, of course, to the City of Barrie as our Deputy Clerk.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
With that, members of council, I believe that completes the announcements. It just brings us to the circulation list. Are there any items from the circulation list that members of General Committee would care to move or refer? Okay, seeing none, I'm just going to double check here. I think that's everything. Do we have the other item after the, no, that is it. Okay, if no items at the circulation list, that completes General Committee's agenda. We are back Monday night for City Council. Thank you again, everyone, and have a good evening.